11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country.
That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Friday, the 12th of April.
The police have officially launched an investigation into Labour's deputy leader, Angela Rayner. She's been accused of failing to pay capital gains tax and disobeying electoral law.
This is an unwelcome distraction for Sir Keir Starmer, who today wants to talk about his commitment to maintaining Britain's independent nuclear deterrent and increasing defence spending, but only when resources allow.
And amid it all, could World War III be on the cards? Reports say Iran is preparing a revenge attack on Israel within the next 48 hours.
Iran and its 3,000 missiles potentially kicking off some escalating war does seem rather more important than the tax affairs of the deputy leader of the Labour Party. But it does beg the question, how safe are we?
Well, how safe are we? And would we be safer under a Labour government? Keir Starmer is very much out and about saying how he is so committed to our nuclear deterrent. He wants to up defence spending to 2.5% of GDP.
But only when resources allow.
You are in safe hands under the Labour Party, of course, distancing himself massively, continuing to do so from his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn. But do you trust Labour, if resources allow, to keep our nation safe?
That's the question we want to read. Your responses, gbnews.com/your say. Would we be safer under a Labour government? Or indeed, are things fine as they are? Or do none of them have a clue? We're going to be talking about the defence situation of the country, but also the more particulars of scandal, political scandal, and now police investigation too. It's going to be a busy show with a fast-paced news agenda. Stick with us throughout it. Good afternoon, Britain. But now, it's your headlines with Sam.
Good afternoon from the newsroom. 2 minutes past 12, I'm Sam Francis, and a look at the headlines this hour. The Labour Party says it's confident that Angela Rayner has complied with the rules after Greater Manchester Police launched an investigation over her tax affairs. It relates to information she gave about her living situation a decade ago. The new investigation comes after Conservative MP James Daly reported the Labour MP to Greater Manchester Police. Asked if it was politically motivated, Defence Secretary Grant Shapps said the investigation will reveal the facts.
I think the double standards have been extraordinary. Angela Rayner herself has spent her political career calling people out for exactly the thing that she seems to be doing now. It's not acceptable to ignore it, and it's not acceptable for Keir Starmer to say he won't even read reports into it. This is something which is a serious matter. It's important that it's looked into properly, and I welcome the idea that the police are doing that.
In other news, new documents have revealed that the former managing director of the Post Office suggested that sub-postmasters, he said, chose to blame technology when they were short for cash. In an email from 2009, Alan Cook said there was absolutely no logical reason that software was to blame. Well, speaking at the Horizon inquiry this morning, he said those comments were unacceptable and he will regret them for the rest of his life. He's also admitted he didn't know the organisation was itself prosecuting sub-postmasters in about 2/3 of those cases. More than 900 sub-postmasters were wrongly prosecuted due to a faulty IT system between 1999 and 2015. Sir Keir Starmer says that Britain's nuclear deterrent is the bedrock of Labour's plan to keep the country safe. The Labour leader is visiting Barrow-in-Furness today, where nuclear submarines are being built. He's expected to reaffirm his party's commitment to defence spending, with a pledge to boost investment and strengthen Britain's security and economic growth if Labour wins the next election. The government, though, has dismissed the visit as a distraction. But Shadow Defence Minister Luke Pollard says bolstering the nation's defences is an economic opportunity.
When economic conditions allow, we hope to get to 2.5% of GDP on defence, making sure that we can support those men and women in our armed forces, have the equipment and the capabilities that they need to deter aggression, but if necessary, defeat an opponent in war. And that is what Keir is setting out today.
Britain is turning an economic corner, that's according to the Chancellor, after the nation's output grew by 0.1% in February. The Office for National Statistics has also revised January's figure, pushing it up to 0.3%. Those latest numbers suggest that Britain is coming out of recession with significant improvements across manufacturing, particularly in the car sector. The Defence Secretary says a new British military laser could be on Ukraine's front line by 2027 to help take down Russian drones. And a warning, if you're watching on television, the following story does contain some flashing images. Grant Shapps claims the weapon will have huge ramifications for the conflict. The so-called Dragonfire is capable of cutting through its targets with an intense beam of light. It comes after the age of conscription in Ukraine was lowered last week by 2 years, down to 25, in an effort to help replenish troops. Lord Cameron has warned Iran against drawing the Middle East into a wider conflict. The Foreign Secretary spoke to his Iranian counterpart following threats made by Tehran against Israel. There are also concerns that an Israeli airstrike that killed 2 Iranian generals last week could provoke retaliation. Meanwhile, the US has told its officials and families in Israel not to travel outside 3 areas, including Tel Aviv, Jerusalem and Beersheba. Access to funding here in the UK for farmers that are hit by bad weather is to be widened amid fears the effects of climate change are creating a crisis for British agriculture. Grants of between £500 and £25,000 were initially only available to those within 150 metres of a main river that had flooded. The National Farmers Union has welcomed broader access to the funds, but says the impact of poor weather on British farms goes far beyond the recent Storm Henk. And a group of MPs is calling for a strategy from the government to help combat misinformation aimed at young people on the social platform TikTok. Ofcom data suggests that 1 in 10 children aged between 12 and 15 use the platform as their main source of news, despite concerns over the Chinese government's influence on the app. The recommendation is part of a wider report emphasising the need for more trusted voices like scientists and doctors to help combat conspiracy theories. TikTok says it does welcome the idea. That's the latest from the newsroom for now. More in the next half hour. Until then, you can sign up to GB News Alerts. Just scan that code there on your screen. Or if you're listening on radio, go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back. It's 12:07 now. Greater Manchester Police has reopened its formal investigation into claims that Labour Deputy Leader Angela Rayner may have broken electoral law. The claim is that Rayner may have registered a home she did not live in as her place of residence.
Well, the new probe comes after reassessment of the information provided to us. That's according to the police.
Yes, the Labour Party says Angela Rayner welcomes the chance to set out the facts with the police, but that's a very different attitude to the way in which Angela Rayner herself responded to Boris Johnson, remember that, being placed under police investigation.
Yes, in January 2022, Angela Rayner called for the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson to resign, simply due to the fact that he was under investigation, not the outcome of any investigation.
There she is, Boris Johnson's Downing Street. Oh, it's gone now. I was just going to read out the tweet, but essentially, yes, smacks of a little bit of a touch of hypocrisy, perhaps. Shall we head to Westminster and speak with GB News political editor Christopher Hope to bring us the detail on this? Christopher, this will be a bit of a shock to the system for the Labour leadership here. Keir Starmer, he wants to talk about the nuclear deterrent, he wants to talk about defence spending, but this issue with Angela Rayner, now a formal police investigation.
Yes, morning, Tom, morning, Emily. That's totally right. The idea had been to have Sir Keir Starmer at Barrow in Furness today, committing the Labour Party to 2.5% of GDP when the economic circumstances allow, with an interview with the Daily Mail of all places, making clear that Labour backs a nuclear deterrent. Instead, GB News and other outlets are focusing on Angela Rayner, his deputy, and this police investigation announced within the past hour by Greater Manchester Police into whether it centres really on whether she was correctly registered at this house, the second home she had in this council house that she had in Manchester, or the house around the corner where her husband lived. Of course, she's been very clear that she's followed all the correct laws, and the tax was paid when she sold it. No capital gain tax was due, we understand. But it's very, very embarrassing. Labour had been hoping this idea would go away. This whole pressure from, starting with a book from Lord Ashcroft, the former Tory donor, serialised by the Mail on Sunday, pressure by James Daly, a local Tory MP, concerned about it, Conservative supporting, right-wing newspapers investigating it. Labour's been trying to push it away, almost attack the messenger, not go after what was said. We've heard, haven't we, from Labour today saying they got full support in Angela Rayner. Keir Starmer wouldn't say he had 100 support in her yesterday, just full support. But they're trying to hope that it would just go away, but it hasn't gone away. And I think it's now escalating into a real problem for the Labour Party. They will now not be able to comment on it because it's a police investigation, but I think this will overshadow the final weeks in the run-in to a very difficult few weeks would have been for the Tory party, and now it's back on Labour.
Yes, it is interesting, of course, because we have seen a great number of police investigations now that, of course, there were police investigations into Boris Johnson, into Rishi Sunak, into Keir Starmer, and now into Angela Rayner. It's hard-pressed to find a senior politician in the land who hasn't had a police investigation into them. But, of course, investigations can go either way. Back when Keir Starmer was under investigation due to the beers that he had during lockdown, he said that they were essential for work, of course. But during that investigation, Sir Keir Starmer said that if the police find against him and his essential beers, he would resign. Angela Rayner's not saying anything like that today.
Yeah, I forgot all about the essential beers, Tom. That's right. Yes, that was, of course, during lockdown when you weren't allowed to gather for a social occasion. Gosh, what a different world that was. Yeah, totally. I mean, in a sense, I think, there was a moment at which if Angela Rayner could have said, look, I moved out, I was a blended family, I just got married. There's a moment to explain it away, and that is fast disappearing. I mean, with these situations when Rishi Sunak was spotted not wearing a seatbelt in the back of a car, he apologised, paid a fine. But the longer these things go on, if there's a problem, then you've got to make sure that your facts are right. And that's where Angela Rayner is. Now, she has said she is innocent, of course. She says she welcomes the chance to set the record out the facts with the police. And we remain completely confident, that's the party, that Angela has complied with the rules at all times, and it's now appropriate to let the police do its role, do its work. Of course, that's right, but if it gets to the point where wrongdoing is to have found, there will be question marks about why she couldn't come clean at the beginning, and indeed why she allowed other senior colleagues in the Labour team, particularly Sir Keir Starmer, support her for so long. Sir Keir Starmer, of course, has said he will not look at the legal advice upon which Angela Rayner's defence is resting. Some would say that is interesting, given he's a KC, one of the most senior barristers in the country were he barrister, not Labour leader, and he's not wanting to see the evidence put forward. Rachel Reeves told GBNews on Tuesday, the Shadow Chancellor, she also backs Angela Rayner and doesn't need to see the advice or the financial advice on whether capital gains tax were due. So we are going towards a point when this will be settled. The police will decide either way whether there's a problem here. The police, of course, are looking at the issue of whether she had or had not misled the electoral register. The fine for that is £1,000, which could be very embarrassing for her. Separate to that, there's the issue of whether any capital gain tax was due on the sale of a second home, and she says there wasn't any due.
Interesting. Thank you very much indeed. Christopher Hope, our political editor, live from Westminster, bringing us up to speed on everything Angela Rayner. Yes, it remains curious, doesn't it, that Keir Starmer hasn't asked to have a look at the tax advice himself.
It's such a different way to the way in which he responded to the police investigation he found himself under, where he just said, you know what, if they find against me, I'll resign.
Yeah. That's true.
That was a bold and courageous political move. And actually, to some extent, that was the point at which people started to say, this guy's a serious person. This is a bold and courageous and far from timid move. That started to change perceptions about Keir Starmer, I think.
Yeah, I think you might be right on that one. Yes, lots of people did heap praise upon the Labour leader for that, for saying, you know what, if I'm proven to have done something criminal, I will simply resign. Whereas a Labour spokesperson this time around, Angela welcomes the chance to set out the facts with the police. We remain completely confident that Angela has complied with the rules at all times. So there you go. That is the Labour response as it stands.
But of course, it's not what Labour want to be talking about today. They want to be talking about their own policy to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP when the finances allow. That's the crucial asterisk there, I suppose, on the policy, but also, of course, committing to that nuclear deterrent. But also in defence news, the government has its own announcement, a new veteran support scheme with £2.1 million in funding. This scheme is going to support veterans in securing high-paid jobs where they can hone the skills that they developed in the military.
But is this really enough? Rishi Sunak wants the United Kingdom to be the best country in the world to be a veteran. Is it? Or how far off are we? GB News has been asking people in Mansfield if they think the government does enough to support veterans.
I don't think we do, no. You know, you see a lot of homeless armed forces veterans, and I don't think the government do enough to support those people.
No, they seem to be putting the ones that come over on boats up more. The amount of veterans that are homeless, they actually are squatting in the communals at the flats island back, to the point where our housing's getting frustrated because they're causing problems, but they've got nowhere else to go.
No. I think there's a lot of veterans and things that have got a lot of PTSD, which has affected their family life when they've left. And no, I don't think they get enough support at all.
I'd like to think so, yes. My father was a veteran from the D-Day landings, and he always said that the government did. So I'd like to think that he was right.
Now, we talk a lot about veterans on this channel. Indeed, some of our presenters have raised a lot of money for the cause, but it continues to be the case that far too many veterans are homeless and struggle to find employment once they come back from the service. And are we doing enough? Let us know what you think. What could we be doing better? This £2.1 million towards potential jobs, getting people into high-paid jobs, sounds fantastic. How far will that go? What should the priority be? Also families too, families of veterans.
But this is the great thing about the new gbnews.com/your say segment. We get to do live conversation with you. One of the questions, of course, we asked at the beginning was over Angela Rayner's tax affairs. And it must be said that Warren has written in to say... Angela Rayner tweeted Boris Johnson's Downing Street is under police investigation. How can he stay on as Prime Minister? That fact of investigation. She also demanded that other MPs release their tax information. The charge here is one of hypocrisy rather than necessarily guilt.
Yes, because I've also seen in the messages and that some people don't really think this is a big deal. They think it's just the press whipping up this as an issue. But you can't have a deputy leader who talks about how other politicians should reveal all their tax advice, that Boris Johnson should resign over a police investigation and then not expect similar treatment when it comes your way. It is that question of hypocrisy, really, isn't it?
Yes, no, it does seem like that.
Pending the police investigation, of course.
Yeah, Catherine says it doesn't change my opinion on Starmer whatsoever. This was Starmer's Beergate affair. He did exactly the same as Boris, but has the police in his pocket, says Catherine. That's a charge and a half.
Well, there you go. David says, Ms Rayner's tax affairs, the question now is honesty and integrity and hypocrisy. She aspires to be the next Deputy Prime Minister.
And Ross is cutting through all of the noise, saying actually what matters here is policy. When Starmer gets in, he's going to do yet more U-turns and become a new Corbyn. And I suppose
if resources allow.
If resources allow. You could promise anything under the sun, couldn't you? And just say if resources allow. Free ponies for all. If resources allow.
Jeremy Corbyn, free Wi-Fi for all.
Yes.
What else did he promise?
58 billion for the waspy women. 58 billion. He wanted to nationalise rail, mail, water. He wanted to... there was something else he wanted to nationalise. BT.
BT.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. BT is free. Keep your views coming in. gbnews.com/your say. Let us know what you make of the investigation into Angela Rayner's tax affairs and the sale of her council house. And also let us know who do you trust when it comes to defence. But on the way, we'll be discussing an unexpected row between Royal Mail and the UK Border Force. And this is all over those counterfeit stamps. Royal Mail are saying Border Force is to blame. What do you make of it all? This is Good Afternoon Britain. We're on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
TfL bosses have come under fire after banning an advert... Oh, God. They've banned an advert for a comedy show because it had a hot dog on it, because that supposedly promotes obesity.
The comedian Ed Gamble has swapped the image of the fast food favourite in favour of a cucumber instead. And there's the cucumber on the plate.
So is the UK turning into a nanny state? Let's talk to former presenter of Fat Families, Steve Miller, and nutritionist Olivia Parry. Good to see you both this morning. Olivia, it's a comedy show. He's not promoting eating hot dogs, is he? Is this just a load of nonsense?
The thing is, we have a huge problem with overweight and obesity in this country. We're fourth in Europe. It's big business. Advertising for food companies is big business. They make so much money. You just have to switch on primetime TV to watch, food after food advertisements. And it's for the youngsters as well, who don't have the nutritional education. We're not taught cookery in school anymore. People go to college and to university, they don't know how to cook.
But
and it
forgive me for jumping in, Olivia. Forgive me for jumping in, but the whole point with this is it's an advert for a comedy show.
Yes, I know, but this is a wider issue.
I think it's a load of old tosh, to be quite honest with you. It's a hot dog. In fact, I wish they'd have put onions on the hot dog. A bit of what you fancy won't hurt you. You should eat 80-20 anyway. We talk about a nanny state. I actually think, arguably, we're becoming an authoritarian state. Opinions banned. Comedy banned. The England flag banned. It's like we've got to wear a virtual muzzle.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 22 minutes past 12. Now, it's just been over 6 months now since the government's controversial barge, the Bibi Stockholm, first opened its doors to asylum seekers.
Well, as you know, since then, tensions amongst locals have been running rather high. One of the main sources of frustration amongst Portlanders now is a luxury-free bus service that ferries asylum seekers around while locals are left out in the cold.
Luxury bus?
A luxury bus.
Is that an oxymoron?
What's all this?
Our Southwest of England reporter Jeff Moody returned to Portland to find a community just as angry and just as divided as ever.
When the bus comes in Portland, not everyone can get on it.
If they travel on the bus with the local community, there could be some sort of integration, because a lot of people are confused of why they're here, and maybe a little chat on the bus, because that's where people do talk. Because I meet people on the bus every day and you ended up chatting. Wouldn't this be a great way to integrate? But no, they're separated. And how can the local community move forward if they're always kept in isolation from us?
For some, there are echoes of segregation, and it's leading to resentment. Resentment at the special buses, resentment at the healthcare the Bibi residents receive, resentment at the wet weather gear for hiking that Dorset Council provides.
6 months on from the arrival of the first residents on the Bibi Stockholm, the feeling in the local community is just as strong, just as divided and just as passionate as it always has been. And while a community that didn't ask for this argues and accuses, the sheer cost of the Bibi Stockholm sticks in their throat. £34.8 million.
If you break that down into figures, that works out at capacity at about £4,500 per month per head. And I mean, if you do a little bit of investigation, you can rent a really plush house in Sandbanks for that money, or an apartment in Chelsea each. Or, you know, you may as well just send them on a Caribbean cruise for a month, all inclusive, because that's what £4,500 a month will get you for your money.
They were sold the idea the barge was cheaper on the taxpayer's pocket than asylum hotels. But in an investigation by the National Audit Office into the Home Office's asylum policy, it was revealed not only is this more expensive than hotels, at the time of commissioning the barge, the Home Office had not even estimated costs. They were flying blind.
I'm shocked, really. I mean, the Home Office blatantly lied. They told us that the Bibi Stockholm was to offer value for the taxpayer for housing asylum seekers. And we now know from the National Audit Office document that was released at the end of March that it's not just a little bit more expensive, it's exorbitantly more expensive. It's obscene, the cost, the money that is being thrown at this barge.
In a statement, the Home Office told GB News, "We have always been clear that the use of asylum hotels is unacceptable, and that's why we acted swiftly to reduce the impact on local communities by moving asylum seekers onto barges and former military sites. While the National Audit Office's figures include set-up costs, it is currently better value for money for the taxpayer to continue with these sites than to use hotels." But the taxpayers in Portland don't feel they're getting value, and they don't feel valued either. And it's starting to be a problem. Jeff Moody, GB News.
Well, we all get to see the
Do not make me laugh, Tom.
I'm sorry. I do understand the point, but I do think that it is a stretch to call it a luxury bus.
But the point is, it's not very good for social cohesion, is it?
No,
and
it's
for
not.
people in the area's grievances, if you're providing one service for asylum seekers who have just arrived in the area, although they've been there for quite a while now, and the local residents. And I think that woman there, she spoke a lot of common sense, didn't she, about it's not just a huge cost, it's an exorbitant cost. She said it's obscene the amount of money the Home Office is spending on this project, and they did promise, it would be cheaper, this Bibi Stockholm barge, than hotels.
And it does make you think, is this all about how things look as opposed to how things cost? The reason they started using hotels in the first place is because they could get them very, very cheaply.
Yeah.
But obviously it looks very bad, and I think there's something... Well, people feel like their hotels have been taken away from them.
Well, it looks bad, People feel like their hotels are being taken away from them, but also, in reality, jobs are being lost.
Yes.
The people who are working in those hotels, a lot of sort of local business money is being lost from some areas because people can't come to those and stay in those hotels.
The compounding costs.
Yeah.
It's not just the headline cost
Yeah.
of the hotels. That perhaps is a better comparison. Interesting.
Yeah. And there's not much security and the like. So it's all a mess, really. Get your views in on that, gbnews.com/your say.
But now let's return to our top story, of course, Angela Rayner and that police investigation. It all threatens to overshadow Sir Keir Starmer pledging to maintain Britain's nuclear deterrent and boosting defence spending to 2.5% if he wins the next general election. And if resources allow. Now, he's seeking to distance himself further from Jeremy Corbyn, but is he managing to? Let's speak to the former Minister of State for the Armed Forces, Bill Rammell, former Labour MP as well, of course. Bill, this was meant to be a big defence day for Starmer, but all the news bulletins are now leading with his deputy.
Well, I think it is still a big day for Labour's commitments to our armed forces and our defences, and it demonstrates very clearly how much the Labour Party has changed under Keir's leadership. He's making it clear that any government he leads, defence and security will be the #1 priority. And at a time when we face real threats from Russia, from China, from Iran, from North Korea, all of whom have got nuclear capability, I think that's the nuclear commitment is really important. But as well as that, the commitment to spend up to 2.5% of GDP on our defences. Again, it's a very dangerous world. We look at Ukraine, we look at the degree to which China has retreated into isolationism, certainly compared to when I was a defence and a foreign minister, that the threats from rogue states, committing to defence is really important, and Keir is making that absolutely clear today.
What's changed, though, for Keir Starmer? Has he always felt this way, that he's tough on defence, that he sees the value of our nuclear deterrent, that he wants to up spending and all that? Because, of course, he did work beside Jeremy Corbyn. He was happy to see Jeremy Corbyn, who's always been in favour of disarmament, who's always been in favour of clawing back defence spending. So has something changed, or was Keir Starmer just not talking about his actual view in the past?
No, I mean, Keir has always been committed to the defence of our country. Go back to that huge debate where on action against Syria, where Corbyn had to allow a free vote, even for members of the shadow cabinet. And Keir supported action, and he supported our armed forces. You know, you can make accusations about, serving in Corbyn's shadow cabinet. Well, Rishi Sunak served in Boris Johnson's cabinet. You know, you do, if you're committed to delivering for your party, you do serve and you take collective responsibility. But I think it's always been very, very clear that Keir was very different from Jeremy Corbyn, and in his commitment to defence, he's making that clear today.
Isn't that a bit of revisionism? I have on my screen in front of me an article written by someone called Keir Starmer in 2015. This was the week, in November 2015, the week of the Syria-ISIS airstrikes vote. Now, this, I think most people will remember, was a contentious vote in Parliament brought forward by David Cameron. In fact, Hilary Benn, the Labour MP, made an impassioned speech in favour of these airstrikes, and a few oddballs on the Labour benches, led by Jeremy Corbyn, voted against those airstrikes against ISIS. One of those people supporting Jeremy Corbyn in that vote was Keir Starmer. He even wrote a Guardian article about it, saying airstrikes in Syria are lawful, but I'll be voting against them.
Well, look, you know, Keir, and you can make a judgment about whether that was the most effective way to respond to ISIS, but it's been absolutely clear throughout his political career that Keir has been committed to the defence of our country. And it really matters when he's leader of the opposition, when he's the potential next Prime Minister, that he puts it on the line, his commitment to our nuclear capability and our commitment to proper defence. And he's making that abundantly clear.
And Bill, how do you think he's dealt with this Angela Rayner issue. He's been quite defensive when he's been asked about it by the media. He said his officials have seen her tax advice, but he doesn't need to see it. And now we're seeing a police investigation.
We're seeing a police investigation because that's what the police have to do. Look, I think it's very clear that Angela Rayner took detailed tax advice, detailed legal advice over her housing circumstances. She's complied with that advice at all times. And I think the police investigation, whenever it concludes, and sadly, these investigations take an awful lot of time, I believe she will be found to have done nothing wrong. But I tell you this as well, Keir has really demonstrated in all the time he's been Labour Party leader that he's absolutely ruthless. And if he felt for a minute that Angela had not complied with all the rules and advice, I have no doubt that he would have taken action. And he hasn't done that because the advice that Angela took is right and proper. His office have seen the details of that, and on the basis of that, he's convinced there's nothing to answer
Just
for.
a bit odd that he hasn't bothered to look at it himself, seeing as he's so forensic. But thanks, Bill. Bill Rammell, always great to speak to you, former Minister of State for the Armed Forces and Labour MP.
Well, Iran could be preparing a revenge attack on Israel, and could we all be drawn in as little as 2 days' time? We'll talk about that after your headlines with Sam.
Good afternoon from the newsroom. 12:35 exactly. A recap of the headlines this hour. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps has accused Angela Rayner of double standards and welcomed the launch of a police investigation into the sale of her council house. That new investigation comes after Conservative MP James Daly reported the Deputy Labour leader to the Greater Manchester Force over information she gave about her living situation a decade ago. Angela Rayner, though, denies any wrongdoing, and the Labour Party says it is confident she has complied with the rules. New documents have revealed that the former managing director of the Post Office suggested that sub-postmasters, he says, chose to blame technology when they were short for cash. In an email from 2009, Alan Cook said there was absolutely no logical reason that the software was to blame. Speaking at the Horizon inquiry this morning, he said those comments were unacceptable and they are ones that he will regret for the rest of his life. Lord Cameron has warned Iran against drawing the Middle East into a wider conflict. The Foreign Secretary spoke to his Iranian counterpart following threats made by Tehran against Israel. There are concerns that an Israeli airstrike that killed 2 Iranian generals last week could provoke retaliation. Meanwhile, the US has told its officials and their families in Israel not to travel outside of 3 distinct areas. And Scotland is proposing an alternative funding method to host the Commonwealth Games in 2026. That plan is described as cost-effective and would reportedly not require any significant public investment, with money instead coming from ticket sales and broadcasting rights. It comes after Scotland's Commonwealth Games body commissioned a feasibility study after the Australian state of Victoria pulled out of hosting the event. A final decision is due next month. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
The latest GB News travel.
The northbound side of the M6 is closed to an overturned lorry from Shap at 39 to Penrith at 40. Your diversion is via the A6 through Shap and Clifton. Southbound on the M6 there is a lane closure to emergency barrier repairs at Shap again 39, but traffic is coping well. The westbound side of the M27, a lane closure and delays to a broken down vehicle from junctions 9 through to junction 8 for Hamble. It is all clear though for the anti-clockwise side of the M25. An earlier broken down vehicle just after 28 for Brentwood has cleared. The southbound side of the M23 earlier issue at junction 8 to Gatwick at 9 has also cleared, and all lanes have reopened following an earlier broken down vehicle. So that's the very latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Men's mental health. Yeah. Men are starting to talk a lot more. Yeah. You've been through a lot of stuff that people don't know about.
Yeah, I mean, the last few years for me have been very, very difficult. People see me on tour, performing, making music, but myself and my wife, we went through 2 miscarriages. Oh, wow. For us, that was a very devastating time and very difficult to know how to kind of process those emotions. And I guess as a man, I did the thing of bottling up my emotions, and where I feel comfortable to be able to express myself is in the studio, whereas, she had obviously a different reaction to, what happened to us, because not only was it happening to her mentally, psychologically, but it was happening to her physically as well. And I think something that she really wanted to see from me was that sensitivity and that emotion. And I thought that as a man, being strong was trying to bottle up my emotions and just show her that, that I'm being strong for her. But actually being strong is talking about it. And what's happened ever since I've started to talk about it is I've spoken to more men that have experienced baby loss. My wife forced out of me, how do you feel? And I ended up as a mess on the floor. I was exasperating, crying, almost inconsolable. She was just holding me in her arms as we cried together, and we cried together. And I didn't realise I needed that release so badly. Like I said, I've been able to speak to other men, and we've been able to cry together, and they shared their own experiences, which they did similar to me. But actually, as men, I feel like that conversation and that sensitivity and being able to be emotional together.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's just coming up to 20-1. Now, France has told all of its citizens to not travel to Iran, Lebanon, Israel or Palestine.
Yes, this comes as Iran is reportedly preparing to launch a retaliatory attack on Israel within the next 48 hours. That's after 2 Iranian generals were killed in an airstrike in Syria, an attack that Tehran has blamed on the Israeli Defense Forces.
Iran's supreme leader sent out a chilling warning that Israel will be punished, with one of his advisors saying that no Israeli embassies were safe. And of course, the Americans have said they will stand by Israel. Many commentators have taken that to see that America might get involved were Iran to strike. We're on the precipice, potentially, of something very, very grim indeed.
Yes, well, shall we speak to Professor Yossi Meckelberg, Associate Fellow at the Middle East and North Africa Programme for Chatham House. This goes far beyond rhetoric.
Good afternoon. Yeah, it's the rhetoric we are familiar with for many, many years, whether it's directly between Israel and Iran or with the Hezbollah. But at this point, considering what happened nearly 2 weeks ago in Damascus and the escalation of words between the two, and always the expectation that something is going to happen, sometimes it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And given that we know the history here, given that we know that Iran has been using its proxies to send attacks, it's been funding various groups, this is something a little bit more different, a little bit more significant. What risk is there that there will be genuine spillover here?
Yes, and that's exactly the risk. Iran usually feels very comfortable to use proxies, and it has at least 6 proxies in the region between the Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the rest. And by doing that, it achieves its political aims without being directly implicated. On this case, when the threat is coming directly from the Supreme Leader Khamenei, and it says that it's going to launch some sort of retaliation, the risk is, of course, what's going to be the counter-retaliation, either by Israel or its allies. And President Biden was very clear, as some other leaders in Europe, that they will support Israel. And I think Iran, to an extent, think that Israel, it catches Israel in a weak point because of the situation in Gaza and the way the Israel conducts the war in Gaza. But I think the message is very clear that this is a very case.
And when President Joe Biden says he will stand by Israel against the threat of Iran, what does that mean? What do you foresee that meaning? Could that mean all-out war between the United States and Iran and potentially Britain being brought in?
I think an all-out war is for now, it's a remote possibility, but a possible one. For now, it very much depends on what Iran is going to do. On the assumption that the attack in Damascus and the killing of Brigadier General Zaidi was carried by Israel, there also the assumption that Iran almost, and that you see it even by those who support Israel, that Iran has some right to retaliate. But the question is the timing and the scope of it, and also where it's going to happen. It's going to be a direct attack on Israel. Some say it will be in the Golan Heights because Iran said this is an occupied land. Is it going to be on a diplomatic mission? So is it going to be on an attack on one of the allies of Israel, or diplomatic mission of one of the allies? And I think the retaliation by the United States or one of the European countries or together depends to a large extent on what Iran is going to do. The risk, of course, in this kind of sequence of events, that it might lead to what you alluded to an all-out war, but we are not there yet, and hopefully we won't get there.
Well, let's keep our fingers crossed about that. Thank you very much for joining us and talking that through, Professor Yossi Meckelberg. Really appreciate
Thank you very much indeed.
Your thoughts on that. Yeah.
It's interesting. Colonel Richard Kemp, who we often have on this show, he's written a bit of a blistering piece. He says that President Biden has appeased Iran, that in some ways our strategic ineptitude has brought us to this position where Iran feels so emboldened, and that actually, if the United States does defend Israel so far as to be brought into military conflict with Iran itself, Britain should do the same. Now, I'm not sure many people sitting at home watching this would be very pleased to see that happen, but it's a dangerous world we live in.
Very dangerous world. Lots of different potential paths from this moment now. But it would be a foolish thing to say that war was not a possibility at this stage. Really, really concerning stuff.
Well, coming up, an unexpected row between the Royal Mail and the UK Border Force. This is all over counterfeit stamps. China has been accused of flooding Britain with these counterfeit stamps. Why would they do that? See you shortly.
Hello again. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update, brought to you by the Met Office. It's going to be a bit of a wet picture across northern parts today, but drier, brighter and warmer further south because we have high pressure dominating here. Further north though, we have low pressure pushing its way in and frontal systems bring the focus for some outbreaks of rain that are sweeping in across parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England and into Scotland, though the far northeast of Scotland clinging on to some sunshine into the afternoon. Do watch out for some strong gusty winds, particularly in the northwest. Across central southern parts of England and Wales, a lot of bright, fine weather to be had. Although the sunshine may be quite hazy, it's pretty strong now, and so we're likely to see temperatures rising to highs of around 21, possibly 22 Celsius. Sticking with the north-south split as we go through the night, so further outbreaks of rain across northern parts could be quite heavy at times. Drier towards the south, could be some murkiness developing around south coastal parts around the English Channel, but also some clear skies developing at times. Despite the clear skies, temperatures not dropping a huge amount, most places holding up in double figures or high single digits. As we go through Saturday then, a relatively mild start for many of us. Any mist and murk towards the south coast should clear away through the morning. There will be some outbreaks of rain across northern and western parts of England and Wales, but staying dry towards the southeast until the evening. Further north though, an unsettled picture across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some further outbreaks of heavy rain, which could be gusty at times too. Temperatures not quite as high as today. Bye-bye.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, it's 12:48. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Thank you for sending in your views. We were asking, because Rishi Sunak, he says he wants Britain to be the best country in the world for veterans. So we asked you whether it is, what could be done better, what could change for our veterans. Valerie says, my brother-in-law and nephew are American veterans. They really look after their veterans in the States. They have mortgages at special rates, healthcare, special areas at airports, and they have respect. They always have had this. Our veterans get nothing.
Yeah, well, it's to be fair to the government, they did create the new role of Veterans Minister, and that's Johnny Mercer.
Yeah.
He's got a seat around the cabinet table now. So I think, whilst it's fair to say that they're clearly a lot further down this road in the United States, there have been strides made towards that sort of appreciation for veterans in the last few years over here.
Yes, they really venerate their veterans, don't they, in the United States? And sometimes veterans are forgotten in this country, perhaps in culture more than
this is the issue.
Policy.
It's not always government that does this. It's not the government that necessarily mandates how an airport should be laid out. It's sort of culture, business, these individual decisions that I suppose everyone can make in their day-to-day lives about.
And these days, some people are ashamed of the armed forces, which is a shame.
But Tim says we don't spend nearly enough on our veterans. PTSD has had a terrible effect on our ex-military, suicides and homelessness. Very true. The money should be spent looking after those less fortunate. And Tim says that actually perhaps this money shouldn't be promoting the healthier ones into better paid jobs. It should be focusing on those less fortunate. Interesting.
Well, hopefully we can do it all at once. But judging by the number of veterans we hear living on the streets, clearly not enough is being done. But shall we move on? Because we're bringing you the latest on these counterfeit stamps that are flooding into Britain. Royal Mail has now accused the Border Force of not checking fraudulent stamps at the border, just letting them in. And they're widely believed to come from China.
Well, a senior executive at the Postal Service is calling on ministers to put pressure on border officials to stop them coming in. But this is all very curious. Just to what extent is China involved in this? Is it just the case that some people are trying to make a quick buck off the back of swindled Brits in this area? Let's talk about the motives, perhaps, behind this influx. Joining us now is Dr. Alan Mendoza, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. Thank you, Dr. Mendoza. I suppose, looking at this issue, I find it very hard to sort of get my head around what the Chinese involvement could be beyond simply trying to make money.
Well, that's where it gets interesting. So, yeah, of course, these are independent, individual Chinese firms doing it. It's not the Chinese government suddenly printing loads of fake stamps and flooding the market that way. But it becomes a little more sinister, Tom, when you consider that nothing in China, certainly nothing in the Chinese economy, goes on without the Chinese Communist Party knowing about it. This is a repressive regime that goes to extraordinary lengths to control its citizens' thoughts, views, ideas, and the idea that the government would somehow not know this is going on is really stretching credibility. So the question, therefore, is why is the Chinese government allowing companies in China to engage in criminal activities overseas? And that brings you to a more interesting answer, I think.
Well, what is the answer to that question? Why would they allow this to happen? What benefit could there be for the Chinese Communist Party?
So China obviously enjoys creating dissension, creating ruptures in societies internationally that don't necessarily agree with China. So we've seen, for example, that TikTok's malign role in kind of disrupting social attitudes in various countries. With an algorithm that clearly has some relevance to what Beijing wants as opposed to what we in the West might want. You've seen the fentanyl crisis in America, which is, of course, a crisis that started in China, essentially. So, you might ask, well, why would China allow drugs to be supplied across borders to America? And then you've got the stamps issue, which isn't just affecting us, by the way. It's also been heavily commented on in America as well, in the US. So the question is, what's tying all these things together? Well, in many ways, it's just an assault, if you like, on our systems, various of our systems. In this case, stamps, are part of the financial system. They're also part of the confidence that ordinary people have in established institutions in this country. If, for example, you start thinking my stamp isn't going to get through, my check or my payment or whatever it is I'm sending won't get through, you start to lose confidence in the ability of the British state to provide basic services. And that does help China indirectly by keeping us tied up with pointless things like that, as opposed to the really big issues like what are they doing internationally.
No, it's a really, really
very interesting point, isn't it?
Point. And yes, absolutely, the sort of motivations behind this and perhaps the two-stage process that you have to think about rather than some direct sort of printing to just simply to flood with stamps operation. But no, Dr. Alan Mendoza, thank you very much for talking us through that. Really, really curious case there.
Now, they don't want us to trust our institutions.
No, perhaps not. But we should say in response, a spokesperson from the Royal Mail has said Royal Mail takes the illegal production of counterfeit stamps seriously. Since the introduction of barcoded stamps, we've been able to significantly reduce stamp fraud through added security features.
Well, there you go. That's what Royal Mail has to say. Now, coming up, we're going to have more on the news that police have reopened their investigation into the Labour deputy, Angela Rayner. What does this mean for the Labour Party? This is Good Afternoon Britain. We're on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, here's your latest GB News weather update in association with the Met Office. Looking ahead to the weekend, and it's going to turn fresher with showers for many of us. But for the time being, it's still warm and largely settled across southern areas due to high pressure here. A different story further north, frontal systems pushing through, bringing the focus for some outbreaks of rain. And the rain could be heavy at times across parts of Scotland overnight, and do watch out for some strong gusty winds towards the northwest too. Drier further south though, some murkiness, some low clouds, some coastal fog could develop around English Channel coast. It's not going to be a chilly night, temperatures generally holding up in high single figures or double digits in some towns and cities. As we go through tomorrow then, any mist and murk towards the far south should clear away quite quickly, and in the southeast it's actually going to stay largely fine through a big chunk of the day. Across northern and western parts of England and Wales, the cloud will bring some outbreaks of rain, more unsettled across parts of Northern Ireland and in particular Scotland, some heavy downpours possible and some strong gusty winds at times. Temperatures still above average for the time of year though, not quite as high as we've seen today. As we look towards Sunday, it's going to be a fresher day for all of us. Plenty of showers towards the northwest. Some of them could be heavy, could be some thunder and hail mixed in too. A drier picture towards the southeast, but into the early part of next week, the showers are going to become more widespread and it is going to feel markedly fresher than it has done of late. That's it for me. I'll see you again soon.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Variety Cruises have been sailing since 1942, and thanks to them, you could set sail in 2025. You have the chance to win a 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. With your flights, meals, drinks and excursions included, you can choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. You'll also win an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash that you can use to make this summer spectacular. We'll also treat you to these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
I don't think you can go and watch a Shakespeare play unless you already know it. It's almost like you have to understand the story and the characters and perhaps have even done a bit of reading into it. Because if you went completely blind, especially in today's world where we don't speak in that kind of way, it is, I think, probably a bit alienating.
But Dawn is saying it is alienating at the moment because of the lack of representation.
You know what, the actual phrasing they use, right, OK, the disproportionate representation propagated white, able-bodied, heterosexual, cisgender male narratives. I'm sure there's people sitting in a room going, what's the most ridiculous thing we can come up with today?
Yes.
But really, just chuck all these words at it, cisgender, and it's just insane. Of course, Shakespeare was what it was back in the day, and that's why it's mostly blokes and they're mostly white.
And lots of speculation that he was actually gay, isn't there? Because he never really saw Anne Hathaway very often and stayed away a lot of the time. I don't know, maybe he was a big
He might have
gay
been
icon.
transgender for all I know. I mean, I don't...
Biggins, I'm looking at you.
No, I think you're right. I mean, you know, I think that goes for the profession too. I mean, I do think I mean, I remember seeing Macbeth in London with Judi Dench and Ian McKellen, and it was one of the most exciting evenings ever. And it was a cold night at the Donmar Theatre, outside and inside, and that gave it atmosphere. There are certain things that you go along and see something else, and you think, I'll walk out in the interval.
Yeah. Macbeth is a sexy play, though.
Let's talk about, there's so many. Can I live to be 100?
Oh, this is depressing.
I think it is depressing. I like to stay here now. I don't want to live to 100.
don't say that.
I'm right behind
I don't even want to. My father died at 63. That'll be me gone this year.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Friday, the 12th of April.
The police have officially launched an investigation into Labour's deputy leader, Angela Rayner. She's been accused of failing to pay capital gains tax and most disobeying electoral law.
And this is a bit of an unwelcome distraction for Sir Keir Starmer, who today wants to talk about his commitment to maintaining Britain's nuclear deterrent and increasing defence spending, but only when resources allow.
That's it, get out. And the RSPCA, has it gone woke? Well, Britain's largest animal welfare charity is under fire from farmers as it releases a new campaign comparing cattle farming to stamping on snails. We'll host a fiery debate on that shortly.
I mean, Tom, if you're going around purposefully stamping on snails, I suggest you probably need to see a therapist.
Yeah, no, personally, it's not something I've ever wanted to do. I've accidentally boiled a jellyfish before.
You shouldn't admit to such a thing. You'll have the RSPCA on your case.
Well, to be fair, the jellyfish did sting me.
OK, it deserved it. The jellyfish deserved it.
I didn't mean to. I put it in a bucket where we collected, because there were loads of them. We put them in buckets and we left them just outside in the sun. But we went in for lunch. We wanted to come back to have a look at the jellyfish. But sadly, they were floating at the top of the buckets.
I think the point
because they were out in the sun.
That's a very nice story, Tom. I think the point is with this one, I feel farmers feel like they have a bit of a hard time sometimes in the press, and there are all these charities that tell them either they're evil for farming in the first place, people are evil for consuming meat and other farmed products, And now they're comparing the likes of herding cattle to
deliberate animal cruelty.
Yeah.
And actually, to be honest, I've met many farmers. There are not many people who have more care for the animals in their care than farmers in the United Kingdom. They have animal welfare so high on their agenda. I find it very hard to understand how you can sort of believe that farmers are on the same sort of sadistic, cruel level of people who go around stamping on animals.
Yes,
but
the two you can't really compare, but the RSPCA has been accused of doing that in a new advert campaign. We'll get into it, we'll get stuck into it and have a bit of a feisty debate after your headlines.
Tom and Emily, thank you very much. Good afternoon from the newsroom. Just after 1 o'clock, the headlines this lunchtime. The Labour Party says it's confident that Angela Rayner has complied with the rules after Greater Manchester Police launched an investigation into her tax affairs. It's over the sale of her council house in Stockport a decade ago. Questions have been asked about whether she paid the right amount of tax and if it was her main home. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps has accused Angela Rayner of double standards and welcomed the launch of the investigation.
I think the double standards have been extraordinary. Angela Rayner herself has spent her political career calling people out for exactly the thing that she seems to be doing now. It's not acceptable to ignore it, and it's not acceptable for Keir Starmer to say he won't even read reports into it. This is something which is a serious matter. It's important that it's looked into properly, and I welcome the idea that the police are doing that.
The former managing director of the Post Office has admitted today that he should have known there was a deliberate plan to use charges of theft as what's been described as a sledgehammer to crush sub-postmasters into submission. Speaking at the Horizon inquiry, Alan Cook also admitted he didn't know the organisation was itself prosecuting sub-postmasters in about 2/3 of cases. It comes as new documents revealed that Mr Cook had suggested in an email from 2009 that sub-postmasters had chose to blame technology when they were short of cash. In other news, Sir Keir Starmer has committed to boosting the UK's defence budget to 2.5% if he becomes Prime Minister, matching the current government's target. The Labour leader's visiting a shipyard in Barrow-in-Furness where nuclear submarines are being built, and he says Britain's nuclear deterrent is the bedrock of Labour's plan to keep the country safe. The government, though, has dismissed the visit as a distraction, but Shadow Defence Minister Luke Pollard says bolstering the nation's defences is an economic opportunity.
When economic conditions allow, we hope to get to 2.5% of GDP on defence, making sure that we can support those men and women in our armed forces, have the equipment and the capabilities that they need to deter aggression, but if necessary, defeat an opponent in war. And that is what Keir is setting out today.
The Defence Secretary says that a new British military laser could be on Ukraine's front line by 2027 to help take down Russian drones. A warning if you're watching on television, the following story does contain some flashing images. Grant Shapps claims the weapon will have huge ramifications for the conflict. The so-called Dragonfire is capable of cutting through its targets with an intense beam of light. It comes after the age of conscription in Ukraine was lowered last week by 2 years to now 25 in an effort to help replenish troops there. Back here in the UK, a 23-year-old man has denied murdering a Good Samaritan who died as he tried to help a stranger. 46-year-old Chris Marriott was on a post-Christmas walk with his wife and 2 young children when he stopped to help a woman who was unconscious in the street. He, though, was then killed when a car ploughed into a small crowd following a disturbance in the Burngrave area of Sheffield. Hassan Jangur denied the murder and manslaughter of Mr Marriott, but has pleaded guilty to causing his death by dangerous driving. In other news, access to funding for farmers hit by bad weather is to be widened amid fears that the effect of climate change is creating a crisis for British agriculture. Grants of up to £25,000 were initially only available to those within 150 metres of a main river that had flooded. The National Farmers Union has welcomed the broader access to funds, but says the impact of poor weather on British farms goes far beyond recent storms. Gatwick Airport has been ranked Britain's worst airport for flight delays. Data from the Civil Aviation Authority shows departures there were nearly 27 minutes behind schedule on average in 2023. Luton had the second poorest record with an average delay of almost 23 minutes. And in third place was Manchester Airport at almost 22 minutes. And finally, before we head back to Tom and Emily, Scotland is proposing an alternative funding method to host the Commonwealth Games in 2026. The plan is described as cost-effective and would reportedly not require any significant public investment, with money instead coming from ticket sales and broadcasting rights. It comes after Scotland's Commonwealth Games body commissioned a feasibility study after the Australian state of Victoria pulled out of hosting the event. A final decision on the plans is due next month. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts. Just scan the code there on your screen. Or if you're listening on radio, go to our website, gbnews.com/alerts.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. Now, Greater Manchester Police has reopened its formal investigation into claims that Labour Deputy Leader Angela Rayner may have broken electoral law. The claim is that Rayner may have registered a home she did not live in as her place of residence.
The new probe comes after a reassessment of the information provided to us. That's according to the police. Now, the Labour Party says Angela Rayner welcomes the chance to set out the facts with the police. But it's a very different attitude to the way in which Rayner herself responded to Boris Johnson being placed under police investigation. Remember that?
Yes, it was. In January 2022, Angela Rayner called for the then Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, to resign simply due to the fact that he was under investigation.
Yes, here she is writing, Boris Johnson Downing Street is under police investigation. How on earth can he think he can stay on as Prime Minister? But it wasn't just on Twitter. Take a listen to what she said in the House of Commons, how incensed she was over potential, but not confirmed, potential criminality.
So it seems, Mr. Speaker, potential criminality has been found in Downing Street. What a truly damning reflection on our nation's very highest office.
But she's regretting talking about potential this, investigation that, not yet confirmed the other. It's all a bit biting back on the foot, isn't it?
A little bit. Shall we speak to GB News political editor Christopher Hope? Chris, do you think perhaps Angela Rayner regrets being so outspoken when it comes to other people's police investigations?
Yes, well, she made those remarks, of course, in the House of Commons, where you can say things and there's no legal follow-up on that. With Angela Rayner, what we're seeing here is where was she living over 10 years ago. We know from this book by Lord Ashcroft, the former Tory donor, he made clear that he found that she could be living in a different address to the one she said she was living in on the electoral register, and where therefore when she sold that property was any capital gain tax due. This is nothing to do with capital gains tax, simply the police investigating whether she had misled the electoral register by living in a place she wasn't actually living in. And this comes after the police being pressured by local Tory MP James Daly. He's also a deputy chairman of the Tory party. At the heart of this, it goes to transparency. Ever since these claims first emerged by Michael Ashcroft, Lord Ashcroft, the former Tory donor, she's made very clear, Angela Rayner, she's done nothing wrong. She's commissioned some advice from tax experts, legal experts. Her word's been taken by Sir Keir Starmer. There's nothing wrong here. He is not asked to see the evidence that she's paid for and produced, but they've taken a word for it. And we asked Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, the same question on Tuesday. They all support Angela Rayner. But we'll find out pretty soon whether that's right. The police will investigate. What's interesting is now Labour has lost control of the timing of this. Now that the police are involved, this can go on for several months. It might lead right up into the white heat of what could be the autumn general election campaign. Labour, though, today are very clear that Angela welcomes the chance to set out the facts with the police. We remain completely confident that Angela has complied with the rules at all times, and it's now appropriate to let the police do its work. So I think the reporting on this story will die down now while the police get on with their work, but it could go either way, and I think we're going to see it could become a big issue going into the election campaign. Of course, if she's cleared, she will be emboldened by that, and that might well happen, but we'll wait and see.
We'll have to wait and see there. Well, Christopher Hope, thank you for setting out the facts of the case. Of course, Angela Rayner always says she denies any wrongdoing there, but that's now in the hands of the police.
Shall we speak with political commentator Peter Spencer to get his view on this all? Peter, how bad is this for the Labour Party, for Keir Starmer?
Well, it is inevitable that the Tories will keep pressing on this sore because they've really got it in for Angela Rayner, and understandably so, because she is the archetypal Tory-bashing Labour attack dog, and what they want to see most of all is to bring her down, and hypocrisy would suit them very nicely. They had a crack at her on hypocrisy, funnily enough, when she accepted an invitation to go to the Glyndebourne Opera Festival. And she pointed out that Mozart's Marriage of Figaro does actually star a smart servant who outwitted a dim-witted master. And so for that reason, I mean, there is absolutely no love lost between the two. When it comes to the charges themselves, I mean, you know, if you look at her private life at that point, I think you would read it in sort of love ads. It would say it's complicated, and indeed so is the tax thing. I mean, anybody who's split up with a fellow parent but have children in common will testify to how complicated that will be, and for that reason I suspect that it's going to be quite hard for the old bill to actually pin this on her. But I mean, they might do, but they might not. But I'll just make one other point, which is that the ball in this was set rolling by Lord Ashcroft, Tory bigwig, former donor, and the point is made rather impishly by Private Eye that while there's a few grand at stake here over tax she may or may not have paid, thanks to his non-dom status, he's managed to save himself over 100 million smackers. Thank you very much.
Of course, all within the law, given that that is a legal exemption there. But I suppose Lord Ashcroft is quite properly a neutral player in this. I mean, it was another book that he had out about a Conservative Prime Minister and what he may or may not have done with a pig that really did dominate perhaps even more media attention than this incident with the Deputy Labour leader.
Excuse me. Forgive me, I'm just lost for words for the minute.
I apologise for him. I apologise for Tom.
I think it's a bit... Lord Ashcroft wrote, along with Isabel Oakeshott, wrote the book Call Me Dave, which included lots of lurid accusations about a Tory Prime Minister. He's written books about Labour figures. He does enjoy causing this sort of mischief.
Gives everyone the same treatment.
Oh, yes. Oh, indeed, so that's absolutely true. But I come back to the point about the old bill looking into this case. They decided there was not a case to answer, whereupon a Tory MP made a great fuss about it, whereupon they have reopened it. So I have to say that neither that Tory MP nor indeed the Daily Mail, which is picking up this story, neither of them can exactly be accused of political impartiality.
No. Well, thank you very much indeed, Peter Spencer, their political commentator. Always great to speak to you on everything political.
On everything political and indeed animal.
Yes, we're talking a lot about animals today.
We are.
Snails.
It's not just pigs and
cows,
initiation ceremonies at Oxford University. Let's talk about something that has been rather overshadowed by all of this Angela Rayner news. What Labour would like us to be talking about is, of course, Keir Starmer's commitment to our independent nuclear deterrent. He's saying it's the bedrock of his plan to keep Britain safe.
Yes, at the same time, he's pledged to boost the defence budget to 2.5% of GDP. So Keir's budget commitment matches that of the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, and could indicate a significant shift from the Jeremy Corbyn years. If resources allow.
If resources allow. I love the get-out clause. It's wonderful. You can apply it to anything. But let's speak now with GBNews reporter Charlie Peters for more on this. Charlie, I find it very hard to sort of see where Sir Keir Starmer's mind is on this. He's, of course, talking about the Labour history, and it's true that Clement Attlee, the Labour Prime Minister in the 1940s and early 50s, did bring about the nuclear deterrent. But, of course, Keir Starmer did serve in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet for half a decade, and he was a guy that wanted to get rid of it.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer is pointing out that the position he's affirming today, that call for a 2.5% raise as soon as resources allow, is the position that Labour held when it left government. So it's a reaffirmation of a position it's already held. And it also comes when defence is leading, and many times, the political debate at the moment. We heard earlier this year the Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat, and another Minister, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, saying that they wanted the government to improve investment in defence at a much greater pace. So this has been an area of great focus, especially with wars growing and escalating not only in the Middle East, but of course closer to home in Europe after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But at this visit to Barrow today, where the nuclear submarines are built and where their replacement, the Dreadnought class, is expected to be built in the 2030s, we have heard from Sir Keir Starmer, who is anticipated to say that Labour's commitment to the deterrent is unshakable. Now, in response, Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, has said that Labour cannot be trusted with nuclear weapons.
Starmer twice tried to get a Labour leader elected who wanted to scrap our nuclear deterrent. He has 11 members of his own shadow front bench, including the shadow Foreign Secretary and the shadow Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, all of whom have voted against our nuclear deterrent when they've been given the opportunity. He now says, trust me on our Trident, on our nuclear deterrent, but he didn't even mention it in his own leadership election. The simple truth is you can't trust Labour on this.
Well, as Grant Shapps criticises Labour, he's also touting a new weapon. It's called Dragonfire, a new laser beam, that the Defence Secretary is saying will be able to be attached to Royal Navy destroyers in 2027, ahead of the 2032 originally anticipated timetable. Now, the MOD said that this weapon can be fired at just £10 a shot, roughly the same price as a pint of beer in London in 5 years' time, you might imagine, and it can hit a pound coin from a kilometre away. Now, this comes as the Royal Navy has been shooting down drones off the coast of Yemen in the Red Sea fired by the Houthi militia, and drone warfare has, of course, increased in its prominence in modern military engagements due to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Drones have really revolutionised that conflict. Now, Grant Shapps has said in this press release that he's hoping to speed up that 5-year increase in the deployment of these weapons even faster to get them to Ukraine as soon as possible. This is a weapon that he thinks could turn the tide in that conflict.
This seems like something out of science fiction, Charlie. These lasers that we're looking at on our screens now, bright red, it's like something out of Star Wars. Is that what it actually looks like? I mean, my goodness, are we living in the future?
Well, they're being seen as sort of space-age weapons as the military improves. The Defence and Science Technology Laboratory is extremely proud of this effort to bring it forward by 5 years to be attached to those destroyers in the Red Sea. There were some conflicting reports earlier at the start of the conflict in Israel and Gaza that lasers were being used to shoot down the rockets fired from the Gaza Strip. They're not ready to use that technology yet, but this sign that these new weapons could be used to shoot down drones. Of course, that's a huge cost for the Royal Navy at the moment, using very expensive munitions to shoot down much cheaper drones. This could be a sign of Britain leading the way in this new form of military technology.
It's always nice to hear that we could be leading the way.
But also really important, given that asymmetric warfare, very, very cheap drones destroying very, very expensive tech, and you needing to spend, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of munitions to knock down a drone. If you can do that for a tenner, If you can fire a laser for a tenner, that is a huge, huge saving. Charlie Peters, thank you so much for bringing us that. And those marvellous pictures too.
They were brilliant pictures, actually.
I like a laser.
We were just hearing earlier in the show about the threat of Iran, the very real threat, not just only to Israel, but to the region and potentially United States, us being brought into some kind of escalated conflict. We need a good defence.
We need a good light amplified by stimulated emission or radiation.
Yes.
Laser.
Yes, that is what it stands for, isn't it? Yeah, thank you. Do you want to say it again?
Light amplified by stimulated emission or radiation.
There we go. There you go. There's your facts of the day from Tom.
I have to say, I did have to Google that. I knew it stood for something. I knew it's not. It's because laser. It's just a word that we use sort of all the. But it's actually an acronym.
Tom, gotta love you. Anyway, coming up, the RSPCA is under fire for what many are calling a wildly woke rebrand. Lots of farmers, that is. The charity is comparing cattle farming to stamping on snails. Are the two similar at all? We'll be hosting a debate very shortly. Stay with us.
I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
SUV drivers in Oxford will face higher parking charges, proposals tabled by the local Green Party or passed by the City Council. The motion argues that heavier cars like SUVs cause more damage to roads, are more likely to seriously injure or kill pedestrians, and cause more illnesses due to pollution. However, the Alliance of British Drivers has condemned the plan as absolutely outrageous. Well, let's get the thoughts now of the legendary motoring journalist, Quentin Wilson. Quentin, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. We hear a lot about the war on motorists, this time targeting SUVs because of their weight, and the charges could be astronomical. This idea first started in Paris. Now it's come into Oxford. Can you tell us a bit about how it would work?
OK, so the idea is that the charges will penalise people who drive heavier SUVs and I guess by implication electric cars, although Oxford Council haven't said exactly what they're going to do with EVs. But this is all based around this notion of SUVs being heavier than passenger cars, therefore wearing out the roads more. Now, there was a study, I've got it here in front of me, from the University of Edinburgh in 2022 that said real-world tests found that overwhelmingly the wear is caused by large vehicles, buses, heavy good vehicles. Road wear from cars and motorcycles is so low that this is immaterial. Now, obviously, driving around a medieval city like Oxford in an SUV isn't the brightest thing in the world to do. But the idea that we should penalise the owners of these cars based on imperfect science that's been read on social media, I think is completely wrong.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
It's 1:25. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain with me, Emily, and Tom Harwood. Now, farmers are up in arms. They're fuming after the Royal Society for the Protection of Cruelty to Animals, or the RSPCA, launched their rebrand. Now, this is to mark their 200th year.
Now, this video, which you can see here if you're watching television, this snippet compares cattle farming to stepping on snails. If we can see, there we go. And there's a... Oh, Someone's just picked up a snail. Is this where is?
I know he's looking after the snail. This guy.
Looking after the snail and putting it in a plant pot. How sweet.
So they're teaching everyone to be nice to the little snails, but they did have also someone stamping on the snails. So this is a sort of compare and contrast. So if you're a nice, caring person, you will obviously pick up the snail, put it in its little pot, and if you're a nasty, evil person, you'll stamp on it, which I quite agree with. But I think the issue is that farmers don't like it when their legitimate business and legitimate practice and something they've been doing for generations, normally, is compared with something that perhaps others would think is a bit trivial, like injuring a snail.
Quite. Well, shall we get the views of two very different sides to this argument? Today we're asking, is cattle farming animal cruelty? Delighted to be joined by farmer and broadcaster Gareth Wynne-Jones, who says the video left a lot of farmers really quite angry, and senior campaign manager at People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, Kate Werner, who believes the RSPCA actually isn't going far enough. Yeah. Well, my goodness. Let's start with you, Kate. Why aren't they going far enough?
Well, I mean, the message in this video is a positive one. All animals do deserve respect. They're living, feeling beings. They're not inanimate objects to be commodified. And, you know, true respect is not about abusing any animal for a burger or a pair of shoes. And if you agree with the sentiment in the video, the next logical step is to live in a way that causes the least harm possible to animals and go vegan. And of course, there's this misguided belief that some species are more important than others, which is speciesist thinking. But it doesn't really matter if they are big or small, if they're feathered or thinned, if they have 4 legs or 2 legs or no legs at all. You know, all animals feel pain, and they're all deserving of our respect and consideration.
Gareth, why are a lot of farmers angry with this video?
Oh, it's a pathetic advertising propaganda stunt again. And you know what, PETA make me laugh. 45,000 animals they killed last year. Yeah, domestic animals. At least my cows go into the food chain. They're kept happy, they're sustainable, and they go to feed people. Yeah, PETA and the RSPCA are a joke, really. They are trying to tar farmers again and get people to stop eating meat, drinking milk, which we've been doing for centuries. And let me tell you, as a farmer, PETA will never feed anybody. We are the people that feed you every day. And at this time of year, it's been very, very difficult. It's been wet and it's been very hard to get on the ground, and a lot of crops haven't got in. So we're going to need these animals feeding us in the future, because these are an intricate part of the whole ecosystem and the food system. So get into your steaks, get into your chickens, get into your eggs, get into your bacon. Don't listen to PETA.
Well, my goodness, Kate, you've got to come back on that.
Yeah, I mean, the same tired old arguments. PETA is working with farmers to move towards plant-based farming, so we are far from being against farmers. But the fact is that these days, animals on the vast majority of farms are kept and reared intensively. So, you know, chickens are kept by the thousands and thousands in windowless sheds on intensive farms. You know, they are featherless, they're miserable. Cows, no matter what type of farm they're on, they're separated from, their babies are separated from them. They cry out for days for each other because humans drink their milk.
Kate, how many farms are PETA working with then? How many farms are working with you?
Well, we're working with farmers, and we're seeing more and more farmers move away from animal farming and towards plant-based farming.
Gareth, do you know any farmers who are working with PETA?
Not any in Cloud Cuckoo Land that I know of. Not really. No. It's a joke, man. You know, these people say one thing, and they're murdering 45,000 animals, domestic animals, last year. It's an absolute joke.
Gareth, what are you referring to there?
It's all about the money.
Gareth, what are you referring to there? The 45,000 domestic animals. What's that?
Just go online and see how many animals PETA killed in America. 45,000 in 2023.
So Gareth is peddling misinformation here. Peter in the US runs a shelter of last resort. And what we do is we take in animals who are reaching the end of their lives for any reason. They may be unadoptable. And in many cases, euthanasia is the kindest option for those animals. And actually,
45,000 of them
in the area will turn these animals away because they won't euthanize them. So Peter is offering, as I say, a last resort for many families whose animals are suffering.
And I think many families would think that that's a very, very noble service to offer. Is that all that different from what Gareth and many other farmers do?
Of course it's different, because we're talking about commodifying animals to consume them. We want people to live in a way that causes as little harm as possible. And that means not eating animals, not wearing them, not using them for entertainment, not torturing them in laboratories. There is no need to exploit animals in any of these ways. We're in 2024, It's
Can I just come into that? Because these people have never fed anybody. I can tell you as a farmer, I know there'll be more lives lost for me to put my salad, my vegetables and my fruit on my table. I know that. I'm a farmer. If I kill one cow here, it's going to feed many families for many months. And that's the reality. Every single thing that you're putting on your plate, your vegan myth is a joke. Everything you're putting on your plate has a death toll. And the death toll is even bigger for your salads, your cereals and your fruits. That's a fact. Live with it.
Well, I'm afraid we have run out of time. Kate, we started with you. Gareth, we ended with you. But please do both come back. This is a debate that has not, sadly, been settled today on this programme, but we will have you both back on a future date. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much indeed. Gareth Wyn-Jones and Kate Werner there from Peter. Now, in a statement from the RSPCA, they said dairy cows face a number of welfare challenges, from painful lameness to uncomfortable bedding and having no access to pasture. We want to encourage people to understand more about where food comes from and how the animals are reared. What I should say too is that I've been to a number of farms and the care that they take with the animals that I've seen anywhere. I know there are bad practices in some countries, but I do think British farmers by and large do try and do good by their animals.
I think your average farmer in this country cares for their animals more, arguably, than the average pet owner does.
Yeah. Well, Israel braces itself for an imminent Iran attack. The Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, says he's deeply concerned. What does this mean for Britain? Could we be brought into a war?
Very good afternoon. It's 1:34 and a recap of the headlines this half hour. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps has accused Angela Rayner of double standards and welcomed the launch of a police investigation into the sale of her council house. The new investigation comes after Conservative MP James Daly reported the Deputy Labour leader to Greater Manchester Police over information she gave about her living situation a decade ago. Angela Rayner, though, denies any wrongdoing, and the Labour Party says it is confident she has complied with the rules. New documents have revealed that the former managing director of the Post Office suggested that sub-postmasters chose to blame technology when they were short for cash. In an email from 2009, Alan Cook said there was absolutely no logical reason that software was to blame. Speaking at the Horizon inquiry this morning, he said those comments were unacceptable and he will regret making them for the rest of his life. Lord Cameron has warned Iran against drawing the Middle East into a wider conflict. The Foreign Secretary spoke to his Iranian counterpart following threats made by Tehran against Israel. There are also concerns that an Israeli airstrike that killed 2 Iranian generals last week could provoke retaliation. Meanwhile, the US has told its officials and their families in Israel not to travel outside 3 areas: Tel Aviv, Jerusalem and Beersheba. And there are serious shortcomings in the Bank of England's economic forecasting methods. That's according to a report by former chair of the US Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke. It found staff were using out-of-date software with functions that could be automated, often performed manually. It comes after several of the bank's forecasts were repeatedly inaccurate during a period of economic turbulence. And for the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Just scan the code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Let's take a look at the markets this afternoon. The pound will buy you $1.2472 and €1.1705. The price of gold is currently £1,921.01 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 8,033 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
The latest GB News travel.
Hello, I'm Jules Buckley. West Yorkshire firstly, and the eastbound side of the M62 at the Huddersfield turnoff. That's junction 23. Now it's part blocked there. A collision means queues in both directions. The westbound side slowing down as it passes the scene. Northbound M5 in Worcestershire is queuing too in patches. Worcester at 7 up towards junction 6. There was a collision that's now been moved to the hard shoulder, but still seeing some residual queues on the live cameras. Essex, the northbound M11 still struggling too. Harlow 7 up to 7A is queuing. Again, a collision safely moved to the hard shoulder, but still causing residual delays. And in London, the Bexley High Street part blocked just near the George pub, and it's seeing delays. Again, it's all due to a collision there at the moment being dealt with. And for now, that's your latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Hello again. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. It's going to be a bit of a wet picture across northern parts today, but drier, brighter and warmer further south because we have high pressure dominating here. Further north though, we have low pressure pushing its way in and frontal systems bringing the focus for some outbreaks of rain that are sweeping in across parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England and into Scotland, though the far northeast of Scotland clinging on to some sunshine into the afternoon. Do watch out for some strong gusty winds, particularly in the northwest. Across central southern parts of England and Wales, a lot of bright, fine weather to be had. Although the sunshine may be quite hazy, it's pretty strong now, and so we're likely to see temperatures rising to highs of around 21, possibly 22 Celsius. Sticking with the north-south split as we go through the night, so further outbreaks of rain across northern parts could be quite heavy at times. Drier towards the south, could be some murkiness developing around south coastal parts around the English Channel, but also some clear skies developing at times. Despite the clear skies, temperatures not dropping a huge amount, most places holding up in double figures or high single digits. As we go through Saturday then, a relatively mild start for many of us. Any mist and murk towards the south coast should clear away through the morning. There will be some outbreaks of rain across northern and western parts of England and Wales, but staying dry towards the southeast until the evening. Further north though, an unsettled picture across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some further outbreaks of heavy rain, which could be gusty at times too. Temperatures not quite as high as today. Bye-bye.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 20 to 2. Now, Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron said he's deeply concerned about the threats that Iran poses to Israel amid reports that Iran is preparing to launch a retaliatory attack on Israel within the next 48 hours. This after 2 Iranian generals were killed in an airstrike in Syria, an attack that Tehran has blamed on Israel, but Israel has not said it was them.
Yes, this comes after Iran's supreme leader issued a chilling warning that Israel will be punished, and one of his advisers said that no Israeli embassies are safe.
Well, we're now joined by the defence editor at the Evening Standard, Robert Fox. And Robert, this is a dangerous world we live in. We all understand that. This 48-hour warning, the Americans seem concerned, the Israelis are certainly concerned. Should we be?
Yes, because of how specific the Americans are about the warning. 48 hours, that was from yesterday, and they gave it to the Washington media. The Washington Post, Wall Street Journal put it out immediately as given. the commander of Central Command, which takes responsibility, General Mike Kurilla, immediately set off for Israel, and he briefed that he was there to coordinate responses should there be an attack on Israel. Can I say, Tom and Emily, if there is a direct attack on Israel by Iran, America is bound to come in. And if America is bound to come in, the UK and very likely France are likely to come in behind America on that.
Why France?
France is now the leading mainland European ally in the EU and NATO. And there's so much business that's got to be done with France, which you heard a bit from Charlie Peters before. There is a massive defence and security review, not just on the narrow, tank spotting, toys for boys type defence, but the whole business of defence, it needs to be reviewed and updated quickly because things are being overtaken by events and by new threats. Therefore, Iran, Ukraine, both problematic, as well as Gaza, the Houthis and so on, and new types of warfare. We're facing a new kind of warfare, as Charlie was saying, with these laser weapons and these radiation weapons, these radio weapons, in which Britain is going to play a big part. And, of course, adding on to that, everybody, including the American military establishment, is preparing for a Trump presidency. A more isolated, more regional America, concentrating very heavily on the Pacific. France and Britain know that they've got to take up the slack. And it is France and Britain, and it's not France and Germany, and it's not Britain and Germany. Interesting.
Very interesting indeed. And we should say that French citizens have been warned by the government in France not to travel to the area. A number of countries they've highlighted that you should not go to if you're a French citizen. When it comes to Iran and its capabilities, usually we talk about Iran acting via proxies, through proxies in the region to achieve its international aims. What are their actual capabilities when it comes to launching a potential military attack?
That's right on the money. This is where it would be even the best, the strongest Israeli assessment is actually a full-on attack, and it would come from the air on Israeli territory, would be madness, because how would Iran follow it up? Iran, as these two generals that were killed in the Damascus consulate were doing, works by fiddling guerrilla warfare, subversive actions, unexpected, the militias, the proxies like the Hezbollah, and of course the Houthis, which do see themselves as a formed army, and very capable they are too, but they're a guerrilla force, they're a militia force, essentially. This is the way Iran operates. It's both its strength and its weakness. It's saying revenge is a dish best served cold, but it can't wait forever because there is pride, as the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has pointed out. They've got themselves into quite a bind. I've done a piece, sorry, a bit of self-advertisement, for the Standard this afternoon, in which I get to the meat, actually, towards the end. Iran, interestingly, is now committed on at least 5 different fronts. I won't bore viewers by going through all 5, but it is overextended. It's committed to Russia. It's committed to the Houthis. It's committed to the proxies in Syria and Iraq, as well as Hamas. And it's got big troubles on its borders in the Caucasus.
Overstretched. Now, just finally, Robert, you spoke about the need to really update the way that we do military spending and acquisition in this country, the sort of kit that we have, the way that we do warfare now around the world has changed immeasurably in the last 2-3 years, not least due to British advice for the Ukrainians. This new form of asymmetric warfare, very cheap kit, taking out very expensive kit. I suppose we're in need of a thorough review.
Yes, there will be, and I think both parties are now committed. There's going to be a big new nuclear policy announcement, I think, from the Prime Minister within a month, so I'm led to believe. Certainly, Keir Starmer and John Healey are committed to a very big defence review. You practically answered the thing with your question, Tom. But one thing that really does have to change, yes, we can talk about the kit, the new methods of war, the new stretching, the fact that we're committed in hot action in Ukraine, we're committed in the Middle East because we've got to keep those sea lanes open. But the big thing that I'm really looking for, we've got to change in the way we think defence. And we involve society in defence, and defence involves society. It's a huge shift. We've got to forget the things that didn't go so well and probably were on a mistaken premise to an extent, like Iraq and Afghanistan. We've got to think what is in the interest of British society and the British community. And that's going to be a big ask. But it's got to be quick, it's got to be sharp, and it's got to be uncompromising. And I don't think the last few defence reviews I've looked at did that entirely.
Well, there you go. Wise words, as always, from Robert Fox, defence editor at the Evening Standard. Great to have you on the show. Thank you. Thanks, Robert. Well, there you go. Need for a
to digest there.
We need a strategic review into our defence, it seems. There we go.
Well, I'm sure you have thoughts. gbnews.com/your say. But coming up, a new study suggests that diversity does not necessarily boost profits, contrary to many reports. More on that very soon.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Is the brand of toothpaste super important here, or is it more about the toothbrush? Because I was told a long time ago by my dentist, electric toothbrush, Pip, that is the way to go.
You're exactly right. I mean, the action of mechanically removing plaque, so using a brush, is much more effective than the brand of toothpaste itself. But in terms of the ingredient in toothpaste that we're looking for, it's something called fluoride. And fluoride is essential to help remineralize and strengthen our teeth. It's really important to use a toothpaste with fluoride. And in terms of brushing, using an electric toothbrush is just much easier. You know, you're brushing your teeth first thing in the morning, last thing at night. You're going to be a bit tired in those times. So using an electric toothbrush, you just hold it against your tooth and gum and it does all the work for you. So it's just much easier in my opinion.
But you have to use your electric toothbrush properly.
You're exactly right. Yeah, there is a technique of actually brushing your teeth, although it sounds really simple. With an electric toothbrush, you have to hold it against the tooth and the gum. Ideally, you want a pressure sensor in that toothbrush so you know exactly when you're pressing too hard. But if you're using a manual toothbrush, you need to move it around and small circular motions. But actually what I see is people who use manual toothbrushes, they tend to over scrub and over brush, which can actually lead to gum recession and your enamel thinning long term.
Sometimes I will get up in the morning and I will have breakfast and then I'll brush my teeth. Is that wrong?
Unfortunately, that's wrong. So the best time to brush your teeth is first thing in the morning, as soon as you wake up. If you're brushing after you eat and after breakfast, you're brushing your teeth in that weakened acidic state. So your teeth are actually under attack and they're much more vulnerable.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello again, it's 1:50 in the afternoon. Now, new research claims that hiring more ethnically diverse management teams does not actually boost profits, or at least there's no evidence to suggest that it does.
Well, this casts doubts, of course, on previous studies and much reporting. A study in Econ Journal Watch says that previous studies on this by the consultancy McKinsey claiming racial diversity is a business imperative that drives real business results are based on data that cannot be replicated.
Curious. Well, we can now speak with GB News presenter Albie Amonkona. Albie, thank you very much indeed for taking the time out of your busy schedule. This is interesting, isn't it? Because there's been quite a lot of push from reports and, of course, diversity and inclusion teams, which has become quite an industry in this country, to push the idea that if you want to be a successful business, you need to have a diverse leadership team, you need to have a diverse business. But I always thought you wouldn't say to a business team in Japan, oh, you're not ethnically diverse enough, you're going to fail, you're not going to make good profits. I mean, what do you make of this?
I think it's an interesting study because for a very long time the business community has just taken at its word companies like McKinsey, companies like Bain, companies like BCG, when they produce research and they say that diversity leads to higher profits. I think this is probably one of the first studies of its kind to actually show that perhaps diversity and inclusion just don't improve profit. Now, I know Dame Vivian was referenced in this article in the Telegraph, and what she would say is that diversity and inclusion isn't just about profit, it's also about making profits. I was at a dinner.
You're breaking up. We're
going to see if we can fix your audio, Albie, and get you back, because this is really important stuff that we do want to hear. But Emily, this is something that we've seen time and time again. The idea that just sort of, you don't necessarily have to follow a particular business plan, that just the fact of diversity will make your business better. I mean, perhaps that's not as true as we've all been led to believe.
Well, I think there's certainly an incentive to put out studies that suggest that it is true. Because diversity and inclusion, we see the number of jobs per head that are diversity and inclusion related in this country is the highest in the world. This is a money-making industry. Yes, there may be positive aims to it, making people feel included in the work environment and having people of all backgrounds in jobs. But I feel like sometimes there are vested interests here to push a certain narrative.
There are quite a lot of studies that do suggest that businesses that are seen to be socially progressive, people are more likely to want to buy things from. Because people who might care more about sort of social progress values, they base their purchasing decisions on that, whereas people who care less about those things, they just don't really care where they buy their stuff from. So there's an imbalance there in terms of market value and those sort of aims.
I'm not sure it will ever outcompete price point, though. I do think that regardless of what your moral values are and how progressive you are, if something's too expensive, you ain't going to buy it.
Yes, that's true, but I think perhaps the difference here is it's not necessarily about whether the board is actually diverse. It's about whether the company is perceived to be diverse.
Maybe.
That could be the fundamental difference here.
I just worry that sometimes when these studies come out, businesses will just sort of plonk someone in a leadership role from a different background and hope that that fixes their problem.
But frankly, if you have lots of men and women of all races, but they all went to the same schools, they all went to the same universities, is it actually that diverse? Is it surface level diversity, but not diversity of thought? That could also be a real issue.
Well, that's a shame we missed Albie there, but hopefully we'll speak. Let's see if we can get him back, because coming up, are we creeping very slowly out of recession? Yes, the economy has grown by, get this,
0.1%!
Woohoo!
What a joyful
time to uncork
statistic.
the champagne.
Yeah, no, I think that's the sort of thing that only Rishi Sunak could sort of claim victory for. Well, we'll be discussing that and what it means for all of us after this.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello Hello again, here's your latest GB News weather update in association with the Met Office. Looking ahead to the weekend, and it's going to turn fresher with showers for many of us. But for the time being, it's still warm and largely settled across southern areas due to high pressure here. A different story further north, frontal systems pushing through, bringing the focus for some outbreaks of rain. And the rain could be heavy at times across parts of Scotland overnight, and do watch out for some strong gusty winds towards the northwest too. Drier further south though, some murkiness, some low clouds, some coastal fog could develop around English Channel coasts. It's not going to be a chilly night, temperatures generally holding up in high single figures or double digits in some towns and cities. As we go through tomorrow then, any mist and murk towards the far south should clear away quite quickly, and in the southeast it's actually going to stay largely fine through a big chunk of the day. Across northern and western parts of England and Wales, the cloud will bring some outbreaks of rain, more unsettled across parts of Northern Ireland and in particular Scotland, some heavy downpours possible and some strong gusty winds at times. Temperatures still above average for the time of year though, not quite as high as we've seen today. As we look towards Sunday, it's going to be a fresher day for all of us. Plenty of showers towards the northwest. Some of them could be heavy, could be some thunder and hail mixed in too. A drier picture towards the southeast, but into the early part of next week, the showers are going to become more widespread and it is going to feel markedly fresher than it has done of late. That's it for me. I'll see you again soon.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is your chance to win our biggest prize of the year so far. First, there's a totally tax-free £10,000 in cash for you to spend this summer. Then, we want to send you on a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. Thanks to Variety Cruises, you'll be able to choose from any of their 2025 Greek adventures and discover Greece like never before. And with flights, meals, drinks and excursions included, all you have to do is relax. We'll also give you these terrific travel treats. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Friday, the 12th of April.
Now, the police have officially launched an investigation into Labour's deputy leader, Angela Rayner. She's been accused of failing to pay capital gains tax and disobeying electoral law.
It's an unwelcome distraction for Sir Keir Starmer, who today wants to talk about his commitment to maintaining our nuclear deterrent and increasing defence spending. But get this, only when resources allow.
And the UK economy has grown, but wait for it, only by 0.1%. But is this good news, and could this marginal GDP growth be a little step out of Britain's recession?
Now, are you a speciesist? That's a word that we heard in our debate between our Kate Werner, who's from the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, and our farmer Gareth Wynne-Jones. Now, Kate was saying it's a terribly speciesist thing to think that different species have different worth.
Yes, I must give a little shout out to my mum if you're watching, because she got rather annoyed by that conversation. She said, all species are not equal. Does she consider herself equal to a slug? She asks.
Well, that's a very profound point from Mrs. Carver. I think that it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because on the face of it, you hear the thing, oh, we're all equal, aren't we? Sorry, is a flea equal to me? Some people might think yes, but I think that in general you can probably have a sliding scale of value of animals.
Yes, because for example, if you had a pet dog, and that dog happened to have fleas, would you just allow the fleas to enjoy living on your dog, or would you exterminate said fleas?
Oh no, that would be very speciesist.
That would be speciesist. So yes, are all species equal? I'm not sure. If that Peter woman would have been able to answer that one.
I think there might be an overwhelming response to that question at gbnews.com/yoursay. But if you do think all species are equal, I'm really, really keen to hear your argument. Do get in touch, gbnews.com/yoursay. That's the new address. We'll be looking at your comments and reading some out in a little bit. But that's after your latest news headlines.
Tom and Emily, thank you very much. Good afternoon from the newsroom. We seamlessly segue from fleas to the top stories this hour. Sir Keir Starmer says he's confident Angela Rayner has not broken any rules after Greater Manchester Police launched an investigation over her tax affairs. It's over the sale of her council house in Stockport a decade ago. Questions have been asked about whether she paid the right amount of tax and if it was her main home. Angela Rayner, though, denies any wrongdoing. The Labour leader says the investigation will reveal the facts.
We welcome this investigation because it will allow a line to be drawn in relation to this matter. I am fully confident that Angela Rayner has not broken the rules. She will cooperate with the investigation as you would expect, and it's really a matter for the police.
Well, Defence Secretary Grant Shapps has accused Angela Rayner of double standards, and he's welcomed the launch of the investigation.
I think the double standards have been extraordinary. Angela Rayner herself has spent her political career calling people out for exactly the thing that she seems to be doing now. It's not acceptable to ignore it, and it's not acceptable for Keir Starmer to say he won't even read reports into it. This is something which is a serious matter. It's important that it's looked into properly, and I welcome the idea that the police are doing that.
The former managing director of the Post Office has admitted today that he should have known there was a deliberate plan to use charges of theft as what's been described as a sledgehammer to crush sub-postmasters into submission. Speaking at the Horizon inquiry earlier, Alan Cook also admitted he didn't know that the organisation was itself prosecuting sub-postmasters in about 2/3 of cases. It comes as new documents revealed that Mr Cook had suggested in an email in 2009 that sub-postmasters, he said, chose to blame technology when they were short for cash. Sir Keir Starmer has committed to boosting the UK's defence budget to 2.5% if he becomes Prime Minister, matching the current government's target. The Labour leader's visiting a shipyard in Barrow and Furness, where nuclear submarines are being built. He says Britain's nuclear deterrent is the bedrock of Labour's plan to keep the country safe, and that his party was making what he called a generational commitment to defence. The government, though, has described the plan as a distraction. The Defence Secretary says that a new British military laser could be on Ukraine's front line by 2027 to help take down Russian drones. A warning, if you're watching on television, this following story does contain some flashing images. Grant Shapps claims the weapon will have huge ramifications for the conflict. The so-called Dragonfire is capable of cutting through its targets with an intense beam of light. And it comes after the age of conscription in Ukraine was lowered last week by 2 years down to 25 in an effort to help replenish troops there. Back here in the UK, a 23-year-old man has denied murdering a Good Samaritan who died as he tried to help a stranger. 46-year-old Chris Marriott was on a post-Christmas walk with his wife and 2 young children when he stopped to help a woman who was unconscious in the street. He was then killed when a car ploughed into that small crowd following a disturbance in the Burngreave area of Sheffield. Hassan Jangur denied that murder and manslaughter of Mr Marriott, but pleaded guilty to causing his death by dangerous driving. There are serious shortcomings in the Bank of England's economic forecasting methods. That's according to a report by former chair of the US Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke. It found staff were using out-of-date software with functions that could have been automated, often performed manually. And it comes after several of the bank's forecasts were repeatedly inaccurate during a period of economic turbulence. Gatwick Airport has been ranked Britain's worst airport for flight delays. Data from the Civil Aviation Authority shows departures were nearly 27 minutes behind schedule on average in 2023. Luton Airport had the second poorest record with an average delay of almost 23 minutes. And in third place was Manchester at almost 22 minutes. And finally, before we head back to Tom and Emily, in Scotland, a proposal has been made to launch an alternative funding method to host the Commonwealth Games in 2026. The plan is described as cost-effective and would reportedly not require any significant public investment, with money instead coming from ticket sales and broadcasting rights. It comes after Scotland's Commonwealth Games body commissioned a feasibility study after the Australian state of Victoria pulled out of hosting the event. The final decision is due next month. That's the latest from the newsroom for now. Do sign up to GB News Alerts. Just scan the code there on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, though, it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 7 minutes past 2. And now we're going to get to our top story today because there's been a bit of an update. And that's that the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has had something to say about one of his very best friends.
Yes, he says, "I'm fully confident in Angela. She's one of my best friends and I'm sure she'll be cleared." Now, this, of course, refers to the police investigation, the ongoing police investigation that's been launched today into Angela Rayner and the sale of her council house.
Did politicians used to talk like this?
Best friends.
Best friends.
Oh, best
It's all a bit primary school, isn't it?
Yes, Keir Starmer's also said that he's firmly behind Angela Rayner. And Number 10, Downing Street, is saying Labour must come clean on the Rayner row. So there's a to and fro. Clearly, Conservatives are trying to make hay with this.
But to get to the detail of this Rayner row, Greater Manchester Police has reopened its formal investigation into those claims that the Labour Party Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner, may have broken electoral law. Now, the claim is that Rayner may have registered a home she did not live in as her place of residence.
And this all comes after a reassessment of the information provided. That's according to the police. They were reassessing whether they had enough to go on to have a formal police investigation. They've obviously decided that they now do.
The Labour Party says Angela Rayner welcomes the chance to set out the facts with the police, but that's a very different attitude to the way in which Angela Rayner herself responded to Boris Johnson being placed under police investigation.
Yes, remember in January 2022, Angela Rayner called for the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson to resign, simply due to the fact that he was under investigation. There's the tweet. Boris Johnson's Downing Street is under police investigation. How on earth can he think he can stay on as Prime Minister?
And take a listen to this. Just how incensed was Angela Rayner? Just how incensed she was over the potential that Boris Johnson had committed criminality. Not confirmed, but potential.
So it seems, Mr. Speaker, potential criminality has been found in Downing Street. What a truly damning reflection on our nation's very highest office.
I'm sure a lot of politicians are regretting calling for people to resign simply for the fact of being investigated, not being found to have done anything.
Yes, it seems to happen a lot.
Well, shall we head to Westminster now and speak with GB News political editor Chris Hope? And Chris, this is a headache for Keir Starmer on a day that he was trying to make it all about defence.
That's right. Hello, both. Yeah, he's up in Barrow-in-Furness making clear that a Labour government will stand full square behind the nuclear deterrent and commits his government, if he becomes Prime Minister, to hit 2.5% of spending of GDP on defence. That's in some contrast with Jeremy Corbyn, his predecessor, who was certainly not clear at all about whether he would fire nuclear weapons or even support the deterrent if he became leader. But all that has been overshadowed, as we're seeing on the news, with this police investigation into Angela Rayner. It's not really about the house sale so much as whether she lived there and said she was living there when she wasn't 10 years ago. Now, we both sides are lining up their attacks and defences on either side. We've got Keir Starmer this lunchtime saying this will allow a line to be drawn over the uncertainty about his deputy, and fully confident that she'll be cleared. Number 10 saying there are questions to be answered. It goes back to the electoral register. If you have to sign a legal declaration to say you're living there when you vote. The question is, was Angela Rayner living round the corner with a new husband and not living in the house that she said she was living at? So that's what the police are looking into. They are probably going to be speaking to neighbours of Angela Rayner. She, for her part, or the party on her behalf, rather, says Angela welcomes the chance to set the facts with the police. We remain confident completely that Angela has complied with the rules at all times and is now appropriate to let the police do its role. What's happened here politically is the party, Labour Party, has now lost control of the timing of this. So now there's a police investigation. This could report back at any point in the next 6 months, maybe on the eve of a general election. It could become quite a difficult moment for Keir Starmer while he's trying to battle to win votes at the future of his deputy. He won't say, he's been asked 3 times by ITV News this lunchtime, whether she should resign if she's found to have broken the law. Of course, she says she's innocent, no problems here, but this certainly will bring the whole matter to a head, which may be a good thing.
No, and it's definitely a headache in that sense that there's been a lack of control. But my goodness, I'm thinking about the last 5 years of this Parliament. It seems that just about everyone has been under police investigation. It's hard-pressed to find a senior political figure who hasn't been.
Well, you could say that. We had Rishi Sunak being fined for not wearing a seatbelt in the back of a car. We had multiple fines for people in number 10 Downing Street with Partygate and whether having a party when they weren't meant to having a party. That became a big debate. They're all minor infractions. Again, Angela Rayner has done nothing wrong. There's been no proof of any criminality yet, but it's a headache that Labour could do without. And it goes back to transparency. Because she's been insisting she's done nothing wrong. She commissioned legal advice, tax advice, which notably Sir Keir Starmer has not asked to see. That clears her, Angela Rayner says, so we'll wait and see. But clearly it comes down to testing her as a future deputy leader of this country, and that's why it matters so much.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Christopher Hope, our political editor, live from Westminster. Yes, of course, Angela Rayner, we should say, denies all wrongdoing.
But as we know, these police investigations, they can go either way. Now, is the Labour Party parking its tanks on the Conservative Party's lawn? Sir Keir Starmer has vowed to raise defence spending to 2.5% when resources allow and maintain Britain's nuclear deterrent if his party wins the next general election.
Yes, you could say this is a far cry from his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn, who was staunchly opposed to nuclear weapons, something Sir Keir Starmer describes as now the bedrock of his party's defence policy. Well, should we get the thoughts of former Chief of the Air Staff, Sir Michael Graydon? Sir Michael, thank you very much for joining us. Is this music to your ears to see that Keir Starmer is talking about the nuclear deterrent being the bedrock of his defence policy?
Well, I think it'll be music to everybody's ears, certainly in the armed forces and for those who served in the armed forces, because the armed forces have been suffering, basically. Salami sliced for about 20-odd years. And the current budget, given the circumstances that we face in the world today, is insufficient to do the job.
How much can we take what Sir Keir Starmer is saying now at face value? Because it does seem like it is a remarkable about-turn from the position of the Labour Party at the last general election. Jeremy Corbyn famously saying that he wouldn't ever use the nuclear deterrent, so was opposed to Trident all of his life, wanted a minister for disarmament in the shadow cabinet. That was all the sort of era of the Corbyn leadership. But also Keir Starmer himself, before he was involved in the shadow cabinet, as a backbench MP, he had a record of voting against airstrikes in Syria to defeat ISIS. He's someone who has been on the sort of pacifist side of the Labour Party in the past.
Well, I remember Michael Foot. Michael Foot was anti-nuclear and pretty anti-defence, but when Labour got in power, it was very different. So I think, these things happen. People say things.
That was 4 leaders later, Michael.
Yes, but I think you need to recognise that actually Labour has a better record of supporting the armed forces than Conservatives do. I watched a film the other night, which was called The Matter of Life and Death, and it reminded me of something I've always thought, in which David Niven, who was a pilot who had escaped death, was asked by some ethereal person what his politics were. And he said, well, my politics, I support the Conservatives by instinct, but Labour by experience. And I think there's quite a lot in that. And if you ask most serving people today, they will say much the same. Very good talk by Conservatives over the years, but when you actually look at it, you'll find that Labour has done just as well for the armed forces, if not better, than the Conservatives. So I don't think you want to wave that rag too much at the Labour Party. Let's look at the problem and let's deal with it as a nation. And the fact that Keir Starmer is now signing up for it and the nuclear deterrent, I think is good news to be welcomed by all.
Wasn't the Labour Party in charge when we were sending ill-equipped servicemen out to fight for this country in Iraq and Afghanistan on equipment that hadn't been rated properly, that was without adequate supply? This is not an unblemished record.
Well, you have to remember that the lead time on equipment, in particular, is about 10 years. So you have an idea, you put it there, you put it to the politicians, and somebody, Treasury, immediately try and stop it, and then you move on, and you eventually get it in place. And the more complicated it is, the more high technology it is, the more difficult it is to get it in place on time and on cost, as I'm sure you're well aware. So the fact that people were ill-equipped in 2005 or whatever we're talking about, you could probably push that back to quite a long time before, when the money wasn't available to put it in place in time to really get it up in front of people. So I don't think one wants to play politics on this. The important thing is for the nation to recognise that it's a very difficult world. You know that. You only have to look at Europe. You look at the Middle East. You look at the Far East. There isn't a continent where there isn't something pretty awful happening.
Absolutely.
And we have not been actually addressing these problems very well until Ukraine. Now we are, and the fact that both the lead party, Conservatives currently, and Labour are signing up to an increase in defence spending, I welcome, and I think the whole of the armed forces do.
So, Michael, 2.5% of GDP on defence, is that enough? Do you like the measure of GDP? We talk about the percentage of GDP, of course, that can go up and down. Is that a good way of doing things?
Well, it's the traditional way of doing things. No, I don't like it, because it can go up and down. I would like to see, and I'm sure all my old colleagues would like to see, and the current ones too, a recognition of what is needed to give us the right defence and to stick to it and not play the game on GDP.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Great to speak to you. Sir Michael Graydon, former Chief of the Air Staff. Interesting.
Yeah. And,
Labour better on defence.
Well, quite possibly, although we still haven't seen... They've said when resources allow. So yes, 2.5%, grand ambition, both parties match that now. But they're not going to spend it until resources allow. What does that mean?
Well, it might have to do with our rather stagnant economy. Today's GDP figures, well, they show a staggering 0.1% growth. Does this go far enough to fix Britain's crumbling economy? I mean, it is better than nothing.
It's better than zero.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
One more story in. Milton Keynes, absolute chaos in the city. 300-odd youths arrested or at least involved in a
stampede.
A stampede. Yeah, what's been going on?
A stampede through the...
there we are.
This is the video. So this is a stampede through a shopping centre in Milton Keynes. I think, Amy, you live there, don't you? You live nearby.
For those on radio, we can see literally hundreds, scores of kids.
I think there are about 300 kids.
Are they in school uniforms?
Yeah, quite
This is as they've broken up from school, presumably.
Security tried to intervene. They've been accused of being heavy-handed. But I think this speaks to the fact that the landscape of youth services has just been decimated and there's literally nothing for kids.
So hang on, whoa. You think that this has happened because social services have been diluted?
Youth services.
This is because there's no police around, there's no oversight, there's no deterrent, and 300 kids think that they can run through a shopping centre, frightening shoppers out of their lives.
Going to a shopping centre.
Amy, sorry, my kids would not be behaving like that because there's no ping pong available at the local
Aren't your kids
youth
like
centre.
age 4 and 5? These are teenagers, and our teenagers are headed into a world where there are no leisure services, there are no
nothing to do with crime.
It has
If we up the ante on
everything to do-
basketball, it's not going to stop kids being stabbed on the street.
What creates antisocial behaviour is having nothing to do.
It's lack of
with
discipline
being
in the home,
alienated.
lack of discipline in the home, and lack of policing on the
What did
streets,
you
and a judiciary and a penal system that is utterly liberal.
You're going right to the end of the line. What about the preventative measures?
What about the people that these people affect by running through a shopping centre and stampeding? When there's mothers with kids in prams frightened out of their lives, and we're worried about the social services
I'm
aspect
talking about
that's
carrot.
perhaps led to
You're
it.
talking about stick,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. So how long does your solution take to resolve it? Mine takes about 30 seconds. More police, bang them up. Yours...
Russell, should parents be fined?
More police bang up.
Absolutely. And the kids should be taken to task.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now here's a good news story for you. Well, depending on your perspective, the United Kingdom economy grew by 0.1% in February. That's according to the Office for National Statistics. It suggests signs that Britain is creeping slowly out of recession and could well have turned the corner in January.
There's a question mark, though, isn't there, about whether we ever were in proper recession?
So I think we actually were, because there have been some revised statistics from December in particular. December was the real low one that dragged down the final quarter of last year. But it does seem, well, we had growth in January, we've now had growth, and that growth has been uprated. And now growth in February. If we have growth in March as well, that'll be confirmation where we were out of recession. Of course, March could have a massive crash and be a third quarter of overall negative growth, but it seems unlikely. Well, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is he doing a victory lap? Well, he said today that the figures show the economy is turning a corner. Yes, he's very sensible. He doesn't like to go over the top with celebrations. No, but the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, says that low growth is a sign of Conservative economic failure. Well,
it's certainly not something to celebrate. Joining us now is Justin Urquhart-Stewart, economist and co-founder of Regionally. Justin, what's your assessment of these growth figures? Should we be popping the champagne if we could afford it?
Well, I wouldn't get a very big bottle of champagne for this one. I mean, 0.1, it's pretty close to naught. But on the other hand, don't be too negative about it. At least its growth may not be wildly significant. You think what the global economy has been through right the way back from the banking crisis, what we had to go with COVID and all those elements, let alone the issues we had with regard to inflation coming through. And yet, we look at that figure now, you're seeing some growth actually occurring. The question is it going to be enough to give people that vital element of confidence to actually do some more investing, to actually employ more people or go out and spend more? And that's the bit we don't know yet.
I suppose it all hinges on next month's figures in terms of whether we're formally out of recession.
But well, you're absolutely right, because in terms of, you were talking just now about these figures being revised, and quite a lot often these are just rounding elements. 0.1% is, frankly, naught. The element we've got to try and see here is not always helped by the Bank of England's forecasting, which is somewhere between a Ouija board and the divining twigs. As I'll say, look at their crystal balls, which in fact I think was one of the nicknames they used to have. Trying to give us some idea as to where the economy is going. And I'm afraid at the moment they really don't have much of a clue, which they can give us something to work on. What we should be looking at is actually what's happening in the States, which is much more encouraging, because the global economy is very dependent on actually America growing and also China as well. That not so well-known capitalist society not. But that too I find actually a bit more encouraging overall. But the issue we'd love to see is interest rates coming down. Well, actually, they will be delayed for the time being because there are some other inflationary pressures lurking around the corner. So we mustn't be too enthusiastic over this.
Well, disappointing to some, although not to savers, I guess.
Why is it that it looks like those interest rate cuts that we're all expecting, that the markets are expecting, why is it that they now look delayed? This is a lot to do with what's going on in the United States.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And it's the issue, really, of actually saying, is this economy going to have a gentle landing? And the answer is yes. But there are issues going with regard to supply chain difficulties. I mean, look what happened. We had the issue with the Red Sea and the concern over what's happening in the Middle East and, of course, Ukraine as well. Those are all upsetting parts of the supply chain.
Justin,
now, we saw this before. That supply chain gets torn.
We're getting our house in order, suddenly the Americans have a bit higher inflation than they were expecting, the Middle East kicks off, and now what are we getting? Delayed interest rate cuts.
Well, actually, that all the more reason, therefore, to take some confidence in the fact it's 0.1%. Despite all the difficulties we've had, it is positive. But, quite likely to be revised. But take the longer-term picture as to what's happening. We've been through a very bad patch. It's now showing signs of recovery. I'm not quite as enthusiastic as Chancellor Hunt is at the moment, but nonetheless, there is something positive to hang on to. But the economy is still suffering from that lack of confidence. There's a lot the government could do, not in terms of spending money, but encouraging people by way of incentives to actually be starting new businesses, getting more money into those growth businesses. And we've got a lot of them, particularly in the tech area, but we're very bad at funding them.
Well, Justin, do you think the Labour Party understand the role of incentives in boosting the economy? I mean, it's very easy for Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, to say this is all a sign of Conservative failure. But have they given you any idea that things will be rosier, that they'll transform our economy into a high growth with perhaps even 2% GDP growth?
They haven't come to ask me about it, but then again, that doesn't really surprise me. But more to the point, they'll be just merely picking up what they think the holes are in the Conservative policy. It remains to be seen what the ideas are. Now, what concerns me with both sides is there seems to be very little experience of real company understanding company finances and what companies need to try and grow. Merely just giving tax incentives for things, that's not going to be enough. You really want to be able to make sure that there is actually support there in terms of tax, making sure that there's more investment offset so that you can get actually money back for that, and also encouraging more investors to come through. We've got no shortage of money. All those pension fund money is being invested all around the world. Well, actually, some of that could be focused much more in the UK and bringing that back, not because necessarily it's the greatest investment ever, but actually look at those those regional areas of Britain where they've got tech companies trying to develop, but they're not getting the funding coming through. Not government money, private money. So we're actually extending it to things like not just enterprise investment schemes, why not regional enterprise investment schemes? So actually getting more money, if you want to do levelling up, into those areas.
Yes, well, I suppose the money has to have something to go into, and if we have our sclerotic system of counting newts instead of building things, then perhaps that money just will look for other places to go. I do want to ask you, however, about one of the other things that's been slightly underreported today, not just today's growth of 0.1, but last month's growth in January being uprated to 0.3. I mean, this is quite exciting.
That's not a rounding error, surely.
Yeah, no, that's actually much more encouraging. Yes, as I say, look at a longer picture after the revisions and it looks more positive. So, you know, again, that gives you a little bit more confidence as to what's going on. But what it does also show is how actually rather not very good are our forecasting figures. And that's where the Bank of England, frankly, has to catch up. And we've had Ben Bernanke today, the ex-head of the Fed in the States, completing a review of how the Bank of England does its forecasting. And frankly, he was very critical, quite rightly. Some of our software appears to be somewhat out of date. No doubt they're probably getting around to early parts of Microsoft developments. No, time to actually wake this up a bit. We need the Bank of England actually on the front foot here with real indicators as to what we can rely on, as opposed to a group of individuals sitting around giving us a vague idea with their fingers in the air as to what's going to be happening. That's not good enough.
Bank of England on the front foot, that would be nice. Thank you very much indeed. Justin Urquhart-Stewart, always fantastic, economist and co-founder of Regionally. You know, someone's written in saying, you two are always doom and gloom, kids of today. Not children. Maybe look very young. Nice, keep my skin nice.
Keep your skin nice, stay out in the sun, wear sun cream.
I know, I think there is quite a lot to be positive about.
Yes.
It may not be the growth we want to see, but going in the right direction.
Hang on, let's do some maths.
Go on then.
0.3 in January.
Yeah.
0.1 in February.
Yeah.
All you need is 0.1 in March, and that's 0.5 for the quarter. What's 4 times 0.5? 2. That's 2% growth.
And 2 is something that has looked out of reach.
Yeah. But if we continue this trend, that could be 2% growth for this year. It could even be slightly higher than 2% growth for this year. If you annualise that,
and let's hope per capita.
Positive.
Let's hope per capita it's up a bit too. That would be nice.
That's always the catch, isn't it?
That would be nice. People's quality of life getting better.
Well, much more to discuss. Coming up, we'll be discussing how cleaners at a shopping centre in Kent are being forced now, or offered at least, to wear stab vests as part of their uniforms.
Good grief.
Well, that's after your headlines with Sam.
Very good afternoon from the newsroom. Just coming up to 33 minutes past 2, a recap of the headlines this afternoon. Sir Keir Starmer says he's confident that Angela Rayner has not broken any rules after Greater Manchester Police launched an investigation over her tax affairs. It's over the sale of her council house in Stockport a decade ago. Questions have been asked about whether she paid the right amount of tax and if it was her main home. Angela Rayner has denied any wrongdoing. The Labour leader, though, says that the investigation will reveal the facts.
We welcome this investigation because it will allow a line to be drawn in relation to this matter. I am fully confident that Angela Rayner has not broken the rules. She will cooperate with the investigation as you would expect, and it's really a matter for the police.
The former managing director of the Post Office has admitted he should have known that there was a deliberate plan to use charges of theft as what's been described as a sledgehammer to crush sub-postmasters into submission. Speaking at the Horizon inquiry, Alan Cook also admitted he didn't know the organisation was itself prosecuting sub-postmasters in about 2/3 of cases. It comes as new documents revealed that Mr Cook had suggested in an email that sub-postmasters, he said, chose to blame technology when they were short for cash. Sir Keir Starmer has committed to boosting the UK's defence budget to 2.5% if he becomes Prime Minister, matching the current government's target. The Labour leader's visiting a shipyard in Barrow-in-Furness where nuclear submarines are being built. He says Britain's nuclear deterrent is the bedrock of Labour's plan to keep the country safe and said his party was making what he called a generational commitment to defence. And Gatwick has been ranked Britain's worst airport for flight delays. Data from the Civil Aviation Authority showed departures were nearly 27 minutes behind schedule on average in 2023. Luton Airport had the second poorest record with an average delay of almost 23 minutes. And in third place was Manchester at almost 22 minutes. That's the latest from the newsroom. More in the next half hour. Until then, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Queuing north towards Glasgow for the M77, the lane blocked at Junction 1 Dumbreck Road. A queue back to Paisley at 3 for a collision. Now the northbound M6 is closed from Shap at 39 to Penrith Junction 40, queuing back to T-Bay at 38. An overturned lorry there causing big queues. Staffordshire, the northbound A500 is closed off at the moment. Now it's shut between the Audley turn-off and the M6 Junction 16 Stoke turn-off. Big queues for a multi-vehicle collision. Slow going anti-clock on the M25 towards Chertsey at 11. Slow back towards Leatherhead at 9. It's all due to an earlier bump, all lanes open. And a collision causing queues for the coastbound M20 in Kent. Lane 1's out just after Maidstone Junction 7. That's causing a mile's worth of congestion. And that's your latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Hello again. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. It's going to be a bit of a wet picture across northern parts today, but drier, brighter and warmer further south because we have high pressure dominating here. Further north though, we have low pressure pushing its way in and frontal systems bringing the focus for some outbreaks of rain that are sweeping in across parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England and into Scotland, though the far northeast of Scotland clinging on to some sunshine into the afternoon. Do watch out for some strong gusty winds, particularly in the northwest. Across central southern parts of England and Wales, a lot of bright, fine weather to be had. Although the sunshine may be quite hazy, it's pretty strong now, and so we're likely to see temperatures rising to highs of around 21, possibly 22 Celsius. Sticking with the north-south split as we go through the night, so further outbreaks of rain across northern parts could be quite heavy at times. Drier towards the south, could be some murkiness developing around south coastal parts around the English Channel, but also some clear skies developing at times. Despite the clear skies, temperatures not dropping a huge amount, most places holding up in double figures or high single digits. As we go through Saturday then, a relatively mild start for many of us. Any mist and murk towards the south coast should clear away through the morning. There will be some outbreaks of rain across northern and western parts of England and Wales, but staying dry towards the southeast until the evening. Further north though, an unsettled picture across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some further outbreaks of heavy rain, which could be gusty at times too. Temperatures not quite as high as today. Bye-bye.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 38 minutes past 2. Now, we've been talking about farms and snails and species. Why? Because there's a new advert out from the RSPCA, which is comparing farming cattle with stamping on snails.
Yes, I guess the idea of the advert is to encourage us all to look after all animals, regardless of how small they may be, regardless of what species they may be.
Or how much of a brain they have. Personally, I think I'd place cows higher up on the sentience ladder than I do snails.
You know
but
what Tom's doing this evening? He's going to write his little hierarchy of animals.
I thought you were about to say he's going to get on the next Eurostar to Paris and eat some snails.
Well, I mean, you know, snails are delicacy. Mark says, cattle and snails are not the same. If you want to eat a butter and garlic smothered snail, you do not stamp on it, you nurture it. That's very true. You can't stamp on a snail and then eat it.
Richard says, where were the RSPCA when animals were being slaughtered by the government to appease the French during the foot-and-mouth outbreak 20-odd years ago? That was very sad.
Gosh, we're always banging on about the French, aren't we?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a terrible time for British farming.
Do you know, I like this one from Stephen. He says, human beings think they are better than some other species because their egos hardwire them to think so. Some human beings are so evil and wicked that they are actually inferior to some other species. I can play the piano, but a slug can't. But it's not very nice for me to hold that against a slug. Stephen, I can see your logic.
I can't.
No?
No, I genuinely can't. Sorry, I mean, like...
We're horrible and evil, and we treat other animals
Are we going to
badly.
apply that to every animal? I mean, every animal has the same sort of quest, right? Animals attack animals. They want to sort of be dominant in their own sphere. I mean, should we reduce it from a slug? Should we say a flea? Should we say a mosquito? I have absolutely no moral qualm with whapping a mosquito on my hand. Not a single thought rushes through my mind about whether this is nasty or mean. Do some people genuinely feel bad if they do?
Yes, they actually do, really? Including a certain GBNews presenter, Patrick Christys. He won't hurt a fly.
No, really?
He will not hurt a fly.
What about a mosquito?
No, he doesn't want to kill any animals. Genuinely, I have to do it.
I am surprised. I would have thought that Mr. Macho Patrick Christys himself, from Patrick Christys Tonight, 9 till 11 on Monday to Friday.
He's not here to defend himself.
I'm surprised that it's... I'm just imagining now in your house.
Whereas I'm brutal and vicious.
When there's a little mouse that's running around, Patrick's standing on a chair going, Emily, help!
Well, I won't say anything else because I don't want to upset anyone. But yes, clearly I take a more direct approach to pests.
Patrick is not here to defend himself. I think that what we've heard is slander, is libel, and I'm sure Emily will be hearing from Patrick's lawyers. Now, cleaners at a shopping centre in Kent are being offered...
Gear change.
Just a slight one. Cleaners at a shopping centre in Kent are being offered stab vests as part of their uniforms.
Yes, this comes as staff at Boots and Greggs have also been given body cameras and panic buttons.
Well, these measures have been taken due to a surge of attacks on workers in the retail industry.
This is truly shocking. Joining us is former Met Police detective Peter Blexley. I mean, to hear the headlines that even cleaners now at shopping centres are being offered stab vests to presumably avoid attack. Well, not to avoid attack, but if they are attacked, to save their lives. What have we come to?
Exactly. That's the question, isn't it? That this whole story begs. What has this once great nation come to? How much of a threat is a cleaner going to be to anybody as they tidy up the mess that lazy others leave behind? It is truly astonishing. But, of course, it's just a progression. And this really... The rot with regards to retail crime started around about 2014 when the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill got passed. And in that bill was a bit that said any shoplifting under £250 could not go to the higher court. In other words, could not go to the Crown Court. So what the police then decided to interpret that as was basically, well, any shoplifting beneath £250 we won't really worry about. And consequently, there has been a drip, drip, drip of a lack of kind of authority on the streets, a lack of respect for shopkeepers, and a consequent huge, enormous increase in shoplifting and assaults on retail stuff.
Peter, that's appalling. Do you blame the politicians for writing this legislation? Although I suppose the bill didn't say don't prosecute this, it just said don't do it in this particular court, do it in lower courts. Is it the problem of the politicians who passed that or the police who interpreted it?
Primarily, I blame the police. They, of course, will say, well, This came in the midst of the decade of austerity, and we had huge cuts to police numbers, and we had to deploy our resources elsewhere. Well, do you know what? You reap what you sow. If you leave what some may regard as minor crimes, and believe you me, shoplifting is not a minor crime if you're a one-man, one-person band trying to run that local retail outlet. It is not a minor crime. When you turn your backs on that, when you turn your backs on the shopkeepers, whether they be corner shop or multinational corporation, this is what you get: increased lawlessness. And it goes way beyond shoplifting now, because the police have surrendered the streets. And consequently, the criminals are in charge, and this and other violent crime is on the increase.
Yeah, as you say, because of this, whether you're a cleaner, a bus driver, a shopkeeper, any job really, you can potentially be at risk if you're out with the public.
Undoubtedly, we're all a bit more at risk now because policing abandoned the streets. I've given you their excuses earlier on, but now is a different landscape. Yes, there are still problems with retaining police officers and recruiting them, but now surely has to be the time when policing, in one way or another, decides that it will regain the streets for the benefit of us all.
Well, let's hope it does. Peter Blexley, former Met Police detective, really appreciate your time on this very concerning issue.
You can't go soft on the small crimes.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's, you know, we talk about gateway drugs. I mean, it's a bit of a gateway drug when it comes to crime, isn't it? Start with small, move up the scale.
And it's always the same. It's a small proportion of people who do such a large proportion of the crime.
Yeah.
It's a conundrum. But don't go anywhere, because next we'll be discussing how well that new Scottish hate crime law, well, just how well is it getting on? That next.
Not for Homesy Yusuf.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Do you mind if I ask you a little bit about Sebastian? It really amazes me how a mother who can lose a child in such a shocking and unexpected way, so little, so precious, can then turn that grief into something so positive. How did you find the strength to get up, get a camera crew, as you say, travel to the other side of the world and investigate all of this?
I was angry at Sebastian for dying. You know, you feel like saying, God, 32 years later, and I can still get very, very upset about it. I was angry that something that while he was born and lived with me and slept and then died, they were actively campaigning in New Zealand to try and stop this happening, because they had a very high cot death rate there. They had the lady, the Anne Diamond, if you like, of New Zealand, a television presenter called Judy Bailey, went on telly every night and said, if you're just about to put your baby down to sleep, put him on his or her back, not the tummy, and this will help. And their cot death rate plummeted. And I went out to New Zealand and met her, and it was anger that drove me to come back and demand that we have the same advert here, the same campaign. And of course, I got all this complete nonsense from the Department of Health saying, you know, oh, young mothers do not watch television, I was told. In other words, while New Zealand mums were being told how to save their babies' lives, we actively denied British mums that advice during the time that Sebastian and others were dying.
And the other point, I suppose, to make is it's helpful to educate all generations, because when I had my babies, my mum would say, he's not settling, just stick him on his tummy, he'll be much happier, that's what we did with you. And we had to say, well, things have changed, and, you know, but it's about educating everybody, because it's not just the mums that get their hands on the babies.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Well, it's 2:49. And how are the new Scottish hate crime laws getting on?
Well, so well that call handlers are dealing with incidents that have been given a script. Yes, a script defending the First Minister, Humza Yousaf.
Yes, this is an interesting one. Because essentially they've been inundated, Police Scotland, with so many complaints about Humza Yousaf and that infamous speech he gave.
It was a really quite radical speech. He went through a number of senior positions in Scottish society and said he went position white. Lots of people have reported that speech, but so many so that there's now a script. But Police Scotland staff have issued this script. They've been giving this script to their employees in order to
handle all of these requests.
Absolutely.
To handle all of these requests. Now, I believe we will be joined by a comedian to discuss this. I believe it is Josh Howie. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Great to speak to you. I mean, this is farcical, isn't it? There's been so much criticism about these hate crime laws. And now Humza Yousaf, the architect of the law itself, has been, well, inundated with complaints, the Police Scotland have anyway, so much so that they've had to write out a little script for all of the individual police officers to read off.
Yeah, as if their job wasn't hard enough as it is. But of course, you know, he sort of wrote this off. Humza Yousaf said, "Oh, it's everybody's far right, every single person," as opposed to Scottish people just having a good sense of humour and showing that if you live by the sword, you're going to die by the sword. I don't know if that was William Wallace who said that, but the point is that this law has backfired. They have, I think, 7,000 complaints in a week, more crimes supposedly committed than actual crimes that the police are having to spend all their resources dealing with. I think then they whittled it down to 230 supposed complaints that are worth looking into, and they've kind of said that that's a victory. They're like, oh look, there were 230 of these real incidents that happened, but even then they're just reports, they're not actual evidence of any hate at all. And I noted that this week one of the things that they didn't accept was a swastika shaped as a Star of David, which is incredible Holocaust inversion and disgusting, and they wouldn't take that one on board as hate speech. But of course Humza Yousaf saying that Scotland is basically a 96% white country, that is, you know, that's totally fine.
It's very, very odd because, I mean, we can talk about the particulars of any case of hate, but, like, frankly, is this what the police should be doing? Talking about... I mean, there is a case to say, even if there is hateful speech, should that really be illegal? Can't we, as society, work through to sort of shun people who say hateful things rather than getting a knock on the door from Police Scotland?
Good point.
Yeah, well, that's how it was done in the past. And the point is that there are crimes, and when someone commits a crime and incite to violence, for example, being one of them, those are already covered in the laws. So this is just, it's showcasing. It's virtue signalling. It's a waste of everybody's time. And I think regular people in Scotland know that. They've had enough of the SNP, and this is their way of fighting back, of protesting and showing that really, if you're going to create these laws, then they can be turned on anybody. And in this case, Humza Yousaf, the guy who actually came up with them. So it was a way of showing that. But of course, it also means it's a massive waste of police time. And now they've got this script that they have to read. I just feel sorry for the Scottish police people having to sort of read this stuff out.
I mean, Josh, the script is quite interesting because, yes, Police Scotland have issued a guide on a form of words to recite when members of the public complain about the First Minister under these new laws, states that Mr Yousaf had been making reference to his own personal experience of racism and that nothing said in the speech was threatening, abusive or insulting. It adds that when he was referring to white people, he had simply been pointing out a matter of fact. very educational.
Yeah, well, actually, I think that's offensive because what he's saying about his own experience of racism is that he was in a room where everybody else was white. That's racist, right? Like that's a ridiculous thing to say. That because he was his only ethnicity in a room, that somehow that in itself is somehow racist. So of course people should be offended about it. I think they're obviously making a point. I don't think people genuine. I mean, I know some people I've seen online seem to be very, very upset about the clip, but I guess it just shows the hypocrisy. And look, everybody's a hypocrite, but when you're trying to pretend that you're worthier than thou, and actually there are examples that could easily be used against you, then of course the whole thing gets shown to be moot and ridiculous and a waste of time.
Well, what a good way to sum it all up. Josh, Howie, thank you very much for talking us through a very peculiar state of affairs north of the border. Let's hope they don't start locking up too many comedians.
You'd be well annoyed if you received that response from the police, wouldn't you?
Well, coming up next, it's Martin Daubney, so don't go anywhere.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. Here's your latest GB News weather update in association with the Met Office. Looking ahead to the weekend, and it's going to turn fresher with showers for many of us. But for the time being, it's still warm and largely settled across southern areas due to high pressure here. A different story further north, frontal systems pushing through, bringing the focus for some outbreaks of rain. And the rain could be heavy at times across parts of Scotland overnight, and do watch out for some strong gusty winds towards the northwest too. Drier further south though, some murkiness, some low clouds, some coastal fog could develop around English Channel coast. It's not going to be a chilly night, temperatures generally holding up in high single figures or double digits in some towns and cities. As we go through tomorrow then, any mist and murk towards the far south should clear away quite quickly, and in the southeast it's actually going to stay largely fine through a big chunk of the day. Across northern and western parts of England and Wales, the cloud will bring some outbreaks of rain, more unsettled across parts of Northern Ireland and in particular Scotland, some heavy downpours possible and some strong gusty winds at times. Temperatures still above average for the time of year though, not quite as high as we've seen today. As we look towards Sunday, it's going to be a fresher day for all of us. Plenty of showers towards the northwest. Some of them could be heavy, could be some thunder and hail mixed in too. A drier picture towards the southeast, but into the early part of next week, the showers are going to become more